I watched my father guide Grandpa Frank to a seat near the airport coffee shop. "Just sit here, Dad. We'll go check in and come right back," he said, placing Grandpa's worn leather bag beside him. My mother adjusted Grandpa's collar, avoiding his confused eyes. Something felt wrong. As they walked toward the check-in counter, I saw my father slip Grandpa's passport into his jacket pocket. That's when I knew. They weren't coming back. They were abandoning my grandfather with Alzheimer's at Denver International Airport. 3 weeks before that terrible morning at the airport, I sat at my parents' dining table, pushing food around my plate, while my father cleared his throat in that way he always did before making announcements. The autumn light filtered through their kitchen windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor I'd learned to walk on 28 years ago. "We need to talk about your grandfather." Dad began, his hands clasped together like he was about to deliver a business presentation. My mother sat beside him, her face carefully neutral, though I noticed how she kept touching her wedding ring, spinning it around her finger in nervous circles. My brother Marcus shifted in his seat across from me, his wife Patricia bouncing their 6-month-old daughter on her knee. The baby gurgled happily, unaware of the tension building in the room like storm clouds before lightning strikes. Frank's condition has deteriorated significantly. Dad continued using Grandpa's first name instead of calling him Dad like he usually did. That small change in language sent warning signals through my mind. The doctors say he needs 24-hour professional care now. He can't live alone anymore. Mom finally looked up, sliding a stack of glossy brochures across the table. Memory care facilities, each one featuring smiling elderly people in sunny gardens, professional staff in crisp uniforms, and promises of dignity and comfort in the golden years. I picked up the nearest pamphlet, my stomach dropping when I saw the monthly costs. $8,000, $10,000, some even higher. "These are excellent facilities," Mom said, her voice steady but lacking conviction. "They specialize in Alzheimer's care. He'd have activities, medical supervision, companionship with other residents." Marcus grabbed a brochure, whistling low at the prices. "This is more than my mortgage. How can anyone afford this?" "Insurance covers some of it," Dad replied quickly, but I caught the flicker of something in his eyes. "And your grandfather has savings." "What about having him move in with one of us?" I suggested, looking around the table. "We could take turns share the responsibility." Patricia's face immediately tightened. She adjusted the baby on her lap, not meeting anyone's eyes. "Our house is barely big enough for the three of us, and with the baby not sleeping through the night yet, adding someone with dementia would be challenging." Marcus nodded in agreement, reaching over to squeeze his wife's hand. "Maybe when we get a bigger place. But right now it's just not feasible." All eyes turned to me. I lived alone in a 2-bedroom apartment downtown, worked as a cardiac nurse at Presbyterian Hospital. Long shifts, unpredictable hours, but at least I had the space. Before I could speak, Dad shook his head. "You work too much, Yolanda, sometimes 70 hours a week. Who would watch Frank when you're at the hospital? What if he wandered off? What if he fell? The liability alone." I could hire someone to help during my shifts. I countered, though. Even as I said it, I knew the math didn't work. Private caregivers cost nearly as much as the facilities. The conversation continued in circles for another hour, each suggestion met with practical obstacles, financial barriers, or flat-out resistance. Mom grew quieter as the evening progressed, staring at the untouched casserole in the center of the table. Marcus kept checking his phone, probably looking at their bank account. Patricia excused herself twice to feed the baby in private. As everyone prepared to leave, I helped Mom clear the dishes. Standing at their sink, the same spot where I'd helped with chores throughout my childhood, I noticed Dad in the living room, speaking quietly on his phone. His voice was too low to make out words, but his gestures were animated, almost desperate. "Mom," I whispered, "what's really going on? This isn't just about finding Grandpa a place to live." She turned off the faucet, gripping the counter's edge. Your father's under a lot of pressure. The business hasn't been doing well, but we'll figure something out. We always do. I was loading the dishwasher when I heard Dad's voice rise slightly from the other room. Yes, I understand. The facility in Mexico is much more affordable. No, he doesn't speak Spanish, but if the staff... I see. And the monthly rate includes everything. My blood ran cold. Mexico. I moved closer to the doorway, straining to hear more. Dad noticed me immediately, his face flushing as he quickly ended the call. Just exploring all options, he said, attempting a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Some international facilities offer excellent care at reasonable prices. You're thinking of sending Grandpa to Mexico. I couldn't keep the disbelief out of my voice. He's lived in Colorado his entire life. His English is getting confused enough without adding a language barrier. I said we're exploring options, Dad repeated firmly, using his end-of-discussion tone I remembered from my teenage years. Nothing's decided. Later that night, back in my apartment, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. I called my friend Elena, who worked in elder law, asking about international care facilities. Her response chilled me further. Some are legitimate, she said carefully, but others. Yolanda, I've seen families desperate to find affordable care get scammed, elderly relatives disappearing into substandard facilities, families unable to visit or even communicate with them. If your dad is considering this, please be careful. The next morning, I decided to visit Grandpa Frank. His small house in Littleton looked the same from the outside. Neat lawn, American flag hanging from the porch, his ancient Ford Crown Victoria in the driveway. But inside, signs of his declining condition were everywhere. Unopened mail covered the kitchen counter. The refrigerator contained multiple containers of the same leftovers, each labeled with different days. His beloved workshop in the garage, once meticulously organized, now looked like a hardware store had exploded. I found him in the living room staring at a photo album. "Sarah!" he exclaimed, using my mother's name. "I was just thinking about you. How's little Yolanda doing in school?" "Grandpa, I am Yolanda," I said, gently sitting beside him. "Your granddaughter. I'm 28 now." Confusion clouded his features for a moment before he smiled. "Of course you are. I knew that. Just testing you." But I could see the fear in his eyes, the recognition that his mind was betraying him. We spent the afternoon together, me sorting through his mail while he told stories I'd heard 100 times, though, now with details shifted, names, confused timelines scrambled. Around 3 o'clock, while looking for his checkbook to help pay some bills, I discovered a manila folder hidden in his desk drawer. Inside were legal documents, drafts of power of attorney forms. My father's name was typed in as the designated representative, but the signature lines remained blank. Attached was a sticky note in Grandpa's shaky handwriting, "Not ready yet. Need to think." My heart ached, realizing Grandpa knew what was happening to him, was fighting to maintain some control even as his mind slipped away. I photographed the documents with my phone before returning them to their hiding spot. That evening, I confronted my mother at her book club, pulling her aside before the other women arrived. "Dad's been trying to get power of attorney," I said, showing her the photos, "and Grandpa's refusing to sign." Mom's face crumpled. She suddenly looked older, defeated. "The business is worse than I told you. We might lose the house. Your father's desperate. He thinks if he can manage your grandfather's finances, maybe access his savings." "That's Grandpa's money," I protested. "For his care." "I know," she whispered, tears forming. "But your father says we're family, that Frank would want to help us, that we've taken care of him all these years. He's not thinking clearly anymore, Yolanda. The stress is breaking him." "And what about Grandpa? What's this stress doing to him?" She couldn't answer, just pressed her hand over her mouth and shook her head. The other book club members began arriving, forcing us to table the conversation. But as I left, I made a decision. Whatever my father was planning, I wouldn't let him sacrifice Grandpa to save himself. Over the next few days, I increased my visits to Grandpa, documenting his condition, taking photos of his living situation, recording our conversations with his permission. I researched elder law, patient rights, and financial exploitation. I even reached out to social services asking theoretical questions about vulnerable adult protection. Then came the night I discovered the extent of my father's deception. I'd stopped by Grandpa's house to drop off groceries using my spare key to enter when he didn't answer the door. I found him asleep in his recliner, the TV playing an old Western. But the kitchen table was covered with new documents. Real estate papers, a sales contract for Grandpa's house dated a week ago. The buyer's signature was there. And at the bottom, in handwriting that looked similar to, but wasn't quite Grandpa's, was his signature. My hands trembled as I photographed every page. The selling price was below market value, a quick cash sale. The closing date was 3 weeks away. My grandfather's home of 40 years, the place where my grandmother had died, where every holiday memory lived, had been sold. And Grandpa didn't even know. I wanted to wake him to warn him, but what good would it do? In his current state, he might not understand, or worse, he might understand, and the stress could trigger another decline. Instead, I carefully replaced the documents and left my mind racing with what to do next. The drive home blurred through my tears, not just sadness, but rage. Pure, burning anger at my father for his betrayal at my mother, for her complicity at Marcus, for his willful ignorance at myself for not seeing this coming sooner. But most of all, I felt a fierce protectiveness for Grandpa Frank, the man who taught me to ride a bike, who'd attended every school play, who'd been there when my own father was too busy building his failing business. That night, I made a promise. Whatever scheme my father had concocted, whatever corners he planned to cut, I would protect Grandpa, even if it meant destroying my relationship with my family, even if it meant upending my own life, because that's what you do for people you love. You stand up for them when they can't stand up for themselves. Grandpa had taught me that too. The week following my discovery of the forged house sale documents became a nightmare of watching Grandpa Frank's condition worsen while trying to maintain normalcy around my family. Each day brought new challenges, new heartbreaks, and new evidence of my father's escalating deception. Monday started with a frantic call from Grandpa's neighbor, Mrs. Chen. "Yolanda, your grandfather's in my backyard again. He's looking for Sparky." Sparky had been Grandpa's beagle dead for 15 years. I rushed over during my lunch break, finding Grandpa on his hands and knees by Mrs. Chen's rose bushes, calling for a ghost. "Come on, Grandpa," I said gently, helping him to his feet. "Let's get you home." But Sparky's lost. He insisted, dirt caking his fingernails. "Martha will be upset if we don't find him before dinner." Martha, my grandmother, had been gone for 5 years. Back in his house, I helped him wash up, noticing new bruises on his arms. When questioned, he couldn't remember how they got there. The afternoon light streaming through his kitchen window highlighted how thin he'd become, his favorite flannel shirt hanging loose on his shrinking frame. While Grandpa napped, I called his primary care physician, Dr. Morrison. The receptionist informed me that all of Grandpa's upcoming appointments had been canceled by his son, my father. "He said the family had arranged alternative care," she explained. "Is there a problem?" "Yes, there's a problem," I said through gritted teeth. "Please reschedule his appointments. I'll bring him myself." That evening, I stopped by my parents' house unannounced. Dad was in his home office surrounded by financial documents and empty coffee cups. He looked up with irritation when I entered without knocking. "We need to talk about Grandpa's medical care," I began without preamble. "You canceled his appointments with Dr. Morrison. He needs consistent medical supervision, especially now." "We're transitioning his care," Dad replied smoothly, though his left eye twitched slightly, a tell I remembered from childhood when he was lying. "No point in starting treatments. We can't continue." "Oh, can't continue. What does that mean?" He shuffled papers, avoiding my gaze. Nothing's finalized, but if we move him to a facility, they'll have their own medical staff. It's more efficient. You mean if you ship him to Mexico, I shot back, to some unlicensed place where no one can check on him? His face darkened. You don't understand the full situation, Yolanda. This family is drowning. My business is failing. Your mother's credit cards are maxed out. Marcus is barely making ends meet with the new baby. And your grandfather is sitting on a goldmine of assets while we struggle. Those assets are for his care. He would want to help his family. Dad insisted, standing up so suddenly his chair rolled backward. That's who Frank is. He's always put family first. If he were lucid, he'd offer everything he has to keep us afloat. But he's not lucid, I countered. That's the point. He can't consent to any of this, and you're taking advantage of that. The argument escalated until Mom appeared in the doorway, wringing her hands. Please, both of you, the neighbors will hear. I turned to her, hoping for an ally. Mom, you know this is wrong, canceling his medical care. What's next? She looked between us, torn and tired. Your father's trying to manage an impossible situation. Maybe if you helped more financially instead of just criticizing. The betrayal stung. I left without another word, but not before noticing a new document on Dad's desk. A glossy brochure for Casa de Descanso, with photos of a pristine white building surrounded by palm trees. The tagline read, Affordable memory care in beautiful Guadalajara. The quoted monthly rate was less than a quarter of American facilities. Tuesday brought another crisis. I arrived from my morning visit to find Grandpa's front door wide open, the house empty. Panic set in as I searched each room calling his name. Finally, I found him 3 blocks away at the elementary school trying to pick up little Marcus from kindergarten. The confused staff had already called the police. Officer Rodriguez was kind but firm. This is the 3rd time this month, miss. He needs supervised care. If this continues, Adult Protective Services will get involved. I understand, I assured him, guiding Grandpa to my car. I'm working on arranging proper care. In the car, Grandpa seemed to realize something was wrong. I'm losing it, aren't I? He asked, a moment of clarity breaking through the fog. Sometimes I know where I am, and sometimes it's like being underwater. Everything's blurry and the sounds don't make sense. We're going to get you help, Grandpa, I promised, squeezing his weathered hand. I won't let anything bad happen to you. He smiled sadly. You're a good girl, just like your grandmother. She had that same fierce look when she was protecting something she loved. That afternoon, while Grandpa rested at my apartment, I searched his house more thoroughly. What I found made my blood run cold. In a shoebox beneath his bed were legal documents dating back months. Dad had been systematically attempting to gain control of Grandpa's finances. Multiple power of attorney forms, each slightly different, all unsigned. Bank statements with highlighted balances. Investment portfolios with sticky notes calculating values. But the most damning evidence was a letter from Grandpa to his attorney dated 2 months ago. I'm writing this during a clear moment. My son is pressuring me to sign documents I don't understand. I fear he's trying to take control of my assets. Please help me protect what I've saved for my care. I know my mind is failing, but I'm not ready to give up control yet, especially not to someone who sees me as a problem to be solved rather than a father to be cared for. I photographed everything, building my evidence file. That evening, I hired a home health aide named Grace to stay with Grandpa for a few hours while I worked my night shift. The expense cut deep into my savings, but I couldn't risk him wandering again. Wednesday's revelation came from an unexpected source. Patricia called asking to meet for coffee. We sat in a quiet corner of a local cafe, her baby sleeping in a carrier beside us. I know you think I'm heartless, she began, stirring her latte nervously, about not taking Frank in. But there's something you need to know. Marcus has been having secret meetings with your dad. They think I don't know, but I've heard them talking. Your father promised Marcus money if he supports whatever plan they have for Frank. What kind of plan? I asked, though my stomach already knew. Something about a facility in Mexico. They keep saying it's for the best, and that Frank won't know the difference anyway. But Yolanda, the way they talk about him, like he's already gone, like he's just a problem to dispose of. It makes me sick. Then why haven't you said anything before now? Patricia's eyes filled with tears. Because we do need money. The baby's medical bills, the mortgage. Marcus says this could solve everything, but I can't sleep at night thinking about it. That's someone's father, someone's grandfather. What if it were my dad? She slid a piece of paper across the table. Marcus had this in his jacket. I copied it. It was flight information, 3 tickets to Phoenix for the following week, departing Saturday morning. But paperclipped to it was a 4th ticket. One way to Guadalajara, also departing Saturday, but 3 hours later. The passenger name, Frank Sullivan. They're not going to Phoenix, Patricia continued. Marcus's aunt there died 2 years ago. They're using her as a cover story. The plan is to leave Frank at the airport for someone from the Mexican facility to collect. Make it look like he wandered off on his own. The coffee turned bitter in my mouth. They're going to abandon him at the airport, like he's a piece of lost luggage. I'm sorry, Patricia whispered. I should have spoken up sooner, but I'm speaking up now. Whatever you need me to do to stop this, I'll do it. Thursday morning, I confronted Grandpa's neighbor on the other side, Mr. Yamamoto, who'd mentioned seeing my father at the house at odd hours. He confirmed my suspicions, sharing security camera footage from his driveway that showed Dad removing boxes from Grandpa's garage at 2 a.m, loading them into his truck. I thought it was strange, Mr. Yamamoto said, but he's family, so I figured he had permission. Should I have called someone? Those boxes, I learned, contained Grandpa's military memorabilia, my grandmother's jewelry that was meant for me, and photo albums spanning decades. Dad had been slowly stripping the house of valuables, preparing for the sale he'd forged. By Friday, Grandpa's confusion had deepened. He spent most of the day in my apartment calling for people long dead, trying to leave for jobs he'd retired from decades ago. Grace the aide was patient and skilled, redirecting him gently each time. But I could see the toll it was taking. This wasn't sustainable. During a brief, lucid moment, Grandpa gripped my hand tightly. The wolves are circling, aren't they? He said, his blue eyes suddenly sharp. I can feel them even when I can't remember why. Promise me something, Yolanda. Don't let them put me somewhere I can't find my way home. I promise, Grandpa. You're not going anywhere you don't want to go. He relaxed slightly but then frowned. I tried to refuse them, the papers. He kept bringing papers. But my hand? Sometimes it does things without my permission now. Did I sign something I shouldn't have? I couldn't bring myself to tell him about the forged house sale. Don't worry about papers right now, just rest. That evening, I attended a support group for family members of Alzheimer's patients. Listening to others share their struggles, I realized how common our situation was. Families torn apart by care costs, siblings fighting over responsibilities, elderly parents caught in the middle. But none of their stories involved the calculated abandonment my father was planning. After the meeting, I spoke with the facilitator, Dr. Rebecca Stone. She listened to my story with growing concern. What you're describing isn't just family dysfunction, she said carefully. It's elder abuse, financial exploitation, medical neglect, and now planned abandonment. You need to involve authorities before this trip happens. But he's my father. I found myself saying, surprising even me. If I report him, he could go to jail. My family would never forgive me. And if you don't, Dr. Stone countered gently, your grandfather could disappear into a facility where no one speaks his language, where his medical needs aren't met, where he dies alone and confused. Which outcome can you live with? That night, I lay awake planning. 1 week until the trip. 7 days to either stop my father's plan or find a way to protect Grandpa. I thought about calling Adult Protective Services immediately, but worried they might place Grandpa in emergency housing before I could arrange proper care. I needed a better plan, one that would protect Grandpa while giving me time to secure his future. As dawn broke Saturday morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Family meeting tonight. Dad says we need to discuss vacation plans. Bring Grandpa. Vacation plans. The lie was starting. I texted back a simple okay while mentally preparing for war. They thought I was still in the dark, still the compliant daughter who would go along with family decisions. They were wrong. I spent the morning at Grandpa's house now, understanding why Dad had been so eager to sell it. With the business failing and debts mounting, this property was his lifeline. Grandpa's lifetime of careful saving the equity in this modest home, his military pension, it all represented salvation for my father's financial mistakes. And Grandpa himself, he was just an obstacle to accessing those resources. In Grandpa's workshop, I found his old service revolver carefully maintained, but unloaded the ammunition locked separately. Even in his confusion, he'd kept it secure. I also found his diary from recent months' entries becoming progressively more scattered but revealing his awareness of Dad's intentions. David came again today with papers, pretended to need my signature for his taxes. I'm not that far gone yet. Can't find Martha's ring. Did I move it? Did someone take it? Trust no one? Yolanda visits. She's safe. Remember, Yolanda is safe. That last entry, repeated multiple times in shaky handwriting, broke my heart. Even as his mind failed, he was trying to create anchors, reminders of who he could trust. The family meeting that night was a masterclass in deception. Dad presented the Phoenix trip as a family bonding experience, a chance to visit his sister and show Grandpa the Grand Canyon. Mom nodded along her smile, never reaching her eyes. Marcus enthusiastically discussed tourist attractions, while Patricia held their daughter, her face carefully neutral. "Won't Aunt Linda be surprised to see us?" I said innocently, watching Dad's reaction. "When did you last talk to her?" "Oh, recently," he said vaguely. "She's excited to see everyone, especially Dad." Grandpa, seated beside me, perked up at mention of his daughter. "Linda, little Linda's in Phoenix now. When did she move from Seattle?" No one corrected him. Linda had never lived in Seattle, and she'd been dead for 2 years, something Dad had hidden from Grandpa to avoid upsetting him. Now that merciful lie was being twisted into something cruel. "So we leave next Saturday." Dad continued sliding plane tickets across the table. 7 a.m. flight. Yolanda, you'll drive with us to the airport." I picked up my ticket, noting again, only 3 returns. Of course, wouldn't miss it. After the meeting, as everyone prepared to leave, I helped Grandpa to the bathroom. Away from the others, his confusion lifted slightly. "They're planning something," he whispered. "I can't figure out what, but it feels wrong. Like when you know a storm's coming, even though the sky's still clear." "Trust your instincts, Grandpa. They've never failed you." When we returned to the living room, Dad was showing Marcus something on his laptop, the Casa de Descanso website. They quickly closed it when they saw us, but not before I glimpsed payment instructions in Spanish. As I drove Grandpa home, he dozed in the passenger seat, occasionally mumbling about needing to feed chickens they'd never owned. I thought about Dr. Stone's question, which outcome could I live with? The answer was becoming clearer with each passing moment. At Grandpa's house, I helped him get ready for bed, making sure Grace would arrive for her overnight shift. As I tucked him in, he grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "Whatever happens," he said, eyes momentarily clear, "remember that I love you. You were always my favorite, you know. Don't tell Marcus." He winked a ghost of his old mischievous self. "And if I forget who you are tomorrow, just remind me you're the one who fights for what's right. That's who you've always been." I kissed his forehead, breathing in the familiar scent of his aftershave, the same brand he'd used my entire life. "I love you too, Grandpa, and I'll never stop fighting for you." As I left his house that night, I made my decision. Come Saturday, I'd play along with their plan. I'd go to the airport, I'd watch them put their scheme in motion, and then I'd stop them. Whatever the cost to my family relationships, Whatever bridges I had to burn, I would not let them abandon Grandpa Frank like unwanted baggage in a foreign land. The week ahead would either destroy my family or save it, but first it would save Grandpa. Everything else was secondary to that promise I'd made to the man who'd helped raise me, who'd shown up to every important moment of my life, who even in the fog of dementia recognized me as someone safe. They thought his confusion made him helpless. They were about to learn that confused doesn't mean worthless, that vulnerable doesn't mean disposable, and that a granddaughter's love can be fiercer than any financial desperation. Saturday was coming. Let them think they'd won. The real fight was just beginning. The announcement of our supposed family vacation to Phoenix set off a whirlwind week of preparations that revealed the depths of my father's deception. Each day brought new discoveries that strengthened my resolve to protect Grandpa Frank from the fate they'd planned for him. Sunday morning, I arrived at my parents' house to find Dad in the garage, sorting through boxes he'd taken from Grandpa's house. My grandmother's china, Grandpa's military medals photo albums dating back to the 1940s. Family treasures spread across his workbench like items for a yard sale. "What are you doing?" I asked, though the answer was obvious. Dad didn't even look guilty. "Organizing. No point leaving valuable items in an empty house. They're safer here." "Grandpa's house isn't empty. He still lives there." "For now," Dad muttered, then caught himself. "I mean, while we're traveling, can't be too careful." I picked up Grandpa's Purple Heart earned in Vietnam, running my thumb over the engraved surface. "These belong to him. You have no right—" "I have every right," Dad interrupted, snatching the medal from my hand. "I'm his son. I'm protecting his assets. Something you seem incapable of understanding." Mom appeared with coffee, her hands shaking slightly as she set down the mugs. "David, maybe we should talk to Yolanda about the plans. She deserves to know—" "She deserves to mind her own business," Dad snapped, causing Mom to flinch. "This is hard enough without her constant interference." I watched my parents, seeing them clearly perhaps for the first time. Dad desperate and cornered, convincing himself that betraying his father was somehow noble. Mom trapped between loyalty to her husband and her conscience, choosing the path of least resistance. They were strangers to me now, or maybe I was just finally seeing who they'd always been when pushed to their limits. "I'm taking Grandpa shopping for the trip," I announced. "He needs some new clothes." Dad's eyes narrowed. "Don't fill his head with nonsense. The last thing we need is him agitated before traveling." Monday found me at Grandpa's house, helping him pack while secretly documenting everything. He was having a good morning, excited about the trip though, confused about the destination. "Whoa, is Phoenix in summer?" he kept asking. "Bit hot, isn't it? Your grandmother always preferred the mountains. Maybe we should go to Estes Park instead." "Maybe next time," I said, folding his favorite cardigan. In his closet, I noticed Mom had already been there. Every piece of clothing was marked with labels, but not normal name tags. While Grandpa napped, I explored his house more thoroughly, looking for anything Dad might have missed. In the basement workshop behind his tool cabinet, I found Grandpa's emergency safe. The combination I remembered was my grandmother's birthday. Inside were documents Dad clearly didn't know existed: bonds, a life insurance policy with me as beneficiary, and a letter dated 3 months ago. "Bo, to whom it may concern," it read in Grandpa's increasingly shaky handwriting. "I, Frank Sullivan, being of sound mind for now, declare that I do not wish to leave Colorado for medical care. If I become unable to make decisions, I want to remain near my family, my doctors, and my memories. I do not consent to being placed in any facility outside the United States. I fear my son David is planning something I would not approve of. If you're reading this, please help me." I photographed the letter, added it to my growing file of evidence. That afternoon, I visited an elder law attorney, Janet Blackwood, who reviewed everything I'd gathered. "This is extensive documentation of financial exploitation and planned abandonment," she said, her expression grave. "We could file for emergency guardianship, but that process takes time. The trip is Saturday. Only 5 days, I confirmed. Is there anything we can do before then? Document everything. Record conversations if Colorado's one-party consent laws apply, which they do. If they actually attempt to abandon him at the airport, that's when law enforcement can intervene immediately. But Yolanda, she paused, choosing her words carefully. Once this starts, there's no going back. Your family relationships will likely be destroyed. Are you prepared for that? I thought of Grandpa's confused face, his moments of clarity, his fear of being somewhere he couldn't find his way home. They're already destroyed. I just haven't admitted it yet. Tuesday evening, Marcus called asking me to meet him for dinner. I agreed, curious about his angle. We met at a sports bar, the noise of multiple games providing cover for our conversation. Dad's stressed about the trip. He began, not meeting my eyes. He wants to make sure you're on board with everything. On board with what exactly? I pressed. Taking Grandpa to see Aunt Linda. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. You know Linda passed away, right? I know. Does Grandpa? Dad thought it would be easier. Look, Yolanda, this isn't easy for any of us, but sometimes we have to make hard choices for everyone's benefit. By everyone, you mean everyone except Grandpa? Marcus leaned forward, his voice dropping. Do you know how much memory care costs? $15,000 a month at the good places. That's more than any of us make. Dad's business is bankrupt. Mom's been hiding credit card debt for years. Patricia and I can barely afford formula, and you... When's the last time you took a vacation or bought something nice for yourself? We're all drowning while Grandpa sits on assets he doesn't even remember owning. So the solution is to dump him in Mexico? It's not dumping, Marcus insisted, though he couldn't meet my eyes. It's finding affordable care. The facility has good reviews. Fake reviews, I interrupted. I researched it. Casa de Descanso isn't even licensed. It's a converted hotel that preys on desperate families. Half their patients die within 6 months. Marcus paled slightly, but pushed forward. Dad says they have medical staff activities, everything Grandpa needs. Dad says a lot of things, like telling Grandpa he's going to Phoenix when there's a one-way ticket to Guadalajara with his name on it. Marcus's face went white. How did you... He stopped, realizing he'd confirmed what Patricia had told me. It's not what you think. Someone from the facility will meet him, take him straight there. He won't be alone. He'll be abandoned at an international airport, confused and frightened, handed over to strangers who don't speak his language. If that's not abandonment, what is? The conversation deteriorated from there. Marcus tried every justification. Financial necessity, quality of life, even suggesting Grandpa would want to help his struggling family. Each argument fell flat against the simple truth they were planning to abandon a vulnerable elderly man with dementia in a foreign country to save money. As I left the restaurant, Marcus called after me. You don't have kids, Yolanda. You don't understand the pressure of providing for the next generation. And you don't have a conscience, I shot back. But hey, at least your kid will have formula money built on her great-grandfather's abandonment. I'm sure she'll be proud when she's old enough to understand. Wednesday morning brought another crisis. Grace called to say Grandpa had been agitated all night, packing and repacking, convinced he was late for a military deployment. When I arrived, I found him in full panic mode, searching for gear he hadn't owned in 50 years. Where's my rucksack? He demanded. First sergeant will have my hide if I'm late for formation. It took hours to calm him down, redirecting his military memories to stories of coming home, of meeting Grandma at a USO dance, of building their life together after the war. By afternoon, he was exhausted but peaceful, no memory of the morning's distress. While he rested, I checked his mail and found a letter from Casa de Descanso addressed to David Sullivan. I opened it without hesitation. Written in broken English, it confirmed receipt of a $5,000 deposit and outlined what was included: basic room 3 meal medicine management and activity program. The photos showed cramped rooms with multiple beds, institutional furniture, barred windows, for patient safety. The final line chilled me. No refund after patient arrival. No family visit first 90-day for adjustment. 90 days. 3 months where no one could check on him, where he'd be trapped, unable to communicate, probably over-medicated to keep him compliant. I thought of Grandpa's pride, his independence, his love of morning coffee on his porch watching the Rocky Mountains. This place would kill his spirit long before his body gave out. That evening, I attended another family dinner, this one specifically to discuss travel logistics. Dad had prepared an itinerary complete with tourist attractions we'd supposedly visit. The Grand Canyon Sedona's Red Rocks, Phoenix Zoo, an elaborate fantasy to maintain the lie. Frank's always wanted to see the Grand Canyon, Dad said, glancing at Grandpa, who was focused on cutting his meat into precise squares. Haven't you, Dad? Grandpa looked up confused. The canyon, I saw it with Martha on our honeymoon. Beautiful place. When are we going back? This Saturday, Mom said gently. We're all going together. Martha too. Grandpa's face lit up. I should buy her flowers. She loves those yellow roses. The cruelty of it all, letting him think he'd see his deceased wife, made me physically ill, but I played along, discussing rental cars and hotel reservations that would never be used, watching my family weave their web of deception around a man whose greatest crime was living too long for their financial comfort. Patricia pulled me aside while the men discussed baseball. I can't be part of this, she whispered. I told Marcus I'm taking the baby to my mother's this weekend. I can't watch it happen. But you'll let it happen, I observed. She looked away. What choice do I have? He's my husband, but I won't participate. That has to count for something. It didn't, but I didn't tell her that. She'd have to live with her choices just like the rest of them. Thursday was spent in final preparations. I helped Grandpa choose clothes for the trip, each item carefully folded into his suitcase, while I secretly packed a second bag with legal documents, medical records, and emergency contacts. If they succeeded in getting him on that plane, at least he'd have some protection. Dad stopped by to check on the packing, really to ensure I wasn't sabotaging their plan. He found me helping Grandpa organize his medications. I've got those covered, Dad said, reaching for the pill organizer. The facility will manage his medications from now on. I mean, the hotel in Phoenix probably has policies about guest medications. His slip was telling. He could barely maintain the lie anymore, the stress showing in his hollow cheeks and sleepless eyes. Part of me almost pitied him. Almost. Then I remembered the forged signature on the house sale, the stolen valuables, the elaborate scheme to abandon his father, and any sympathy evaporated. I prefer to handle Grandpa's medications, I said firmly. I know the schedules, the side effects, the combinations. It's safer. Always have to be in control, don't you? Dad sneered. Just like your mother never trusting anyone else to do things right. Trust is earned, I replied, meeting his glare steadily, and you've done nothing to earn mine. That night I couldn't sleep. In less than 48 hours, they'd attempt to execute their plan. I'd gathered evidence, consulted lawyers, documented everything, but would it be enough? Could I really stop them without destroying my family? I thought about calling the police, preemptively reporting the planned abandonment, but without concrete action, what would they do? A family taking their elderly father on vacation wasn't a crime. The crime would come at the airport in that moment when they walked away, leaving him behind. That's when I'd have to act, and I'd have only one chance to get it right. Friday, the day before departure, I spent entirely with Grandpa. We visited his favorite breakfast diner where the owner, Tom, had known him for 30 years. Taking a trip, Tom asked, while serving Grandpa's usual pancakes. Apparently so, Grandpa replied with surprising clarity, though I can't shake the feeling I'm not coming back. Tom laughed, but I saw the truth in Grandpa's eyes. Somewhere beneath the confusion, some part of him understood what was happening. The thought broke my heart and strengthened my resolve simultaneously. We spent the afternoon at the park where he'd taught me to fly kites, then drove through his old neighborhood past the schools his children attended, the church where he'd married Grandma. I was giving him a farewell tour, though I swore to myself it wouldn't be farewell. As evening approached, I took him to my apartment for dinner. Grace had prepared his favorite pot roast, and we ate quietly while watching an old John Wayne movie, Grandpa occasionally commenting on the historical inaccuracies with the authority of someone who'd lived through that era. During a commercial break, he turned to me with startling lucidity. "You know what they're planning, don't you?" I couldn't lie to him. "Yes." "And you're gonna stop them?" "I'm going to try." He nodded slowly. "Good. I may be losing my marbles, but I'm not lost yet. Whatever happens tomorrow, remember that I trust you. You're the only one who still sees me as a person instead of a problem." We finished the movie in companionable silence. As I drove him home for what might be the last time, he sang softly along with the radio. "Fly Me to the Moon," one of Grandma's favorites. His voice, though aged, still carried the melody true. At his house, I helped him prepare for bed one final time. His suitcase stood ready by the door, passport tucked in the side pocket. Everything appeared normal, a family preparing for vacation. Only I knew the truth of what tomorrow would bring. "Good night, Grandpa," I whispered, kissing his forehead. "Whatever happens, remember that you're loved." "Good night, sweetheart," he replied. "Tell your grandmother I'll see her soon." I left his house and drove home through empty streets, my plan crystallizing with each passing mile. Tomorrow at Denver International Airport, my family would attempt to commit an unforgivable act, and I would stop them. No matter the cost. The evidence was gathered. The lawyers contacted the authorities on standby. They thought Grandpa's confusion made him an easy target. They were about to learn that a granddaughter's love could be more powerful than their greed, more cunning than their schemes. Tomorrow would bring either redemption or destruction for the Sullivan family. But tonight, Grandpa slept peacefully in his own bed, in his own home, still believing in the goodness of his family. That innocence would be shattered tomorrow, but at least, for tonight, he was safe. And tomorrow, I'd make sure he stayed that way. The clock on my nightstand ticked past midnight. Saturday had arrived. In 6 hours, we'd leave for the airport. In 7 hours, they'd attempt their crime. And in 8 hours, one way or another, everything would change. I closed my eyes, not to sleep, but to gather strength. Grandpa had taught me many things over the years: how to throw a curveball, how to change a tire, how to stand up for what's right even when it's hard. Tomorrow, I'd use every lesson he'd ever taught me. They were taking him to the airport, but I'd make damn sure he came home. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline Colorado sunshine that normally lifted spirits. But as I drove toward my parents' house at 5:30 a.m., the brightness felt like a spotlight on the crime about to unfold. My phone sat in the cup holder recording everything, while a backup recorder ran in my jacket pocket. Janet Blackwood, the elder law attorney, was on standby, as were the police contacts she'd provided. Every piece was in place for the confrontation ahead. I found the family gathered in my parents' driveway, the scene artificially cheerful. Dad loaded suitcases with theatrical enthusiasm, while Mom fussed over travel snacks she'd never actually serve. Marcus helped Grandpa into the family SUV, speaking too loudly and too brightly about the adventure ahead. Patricia was notably absent, her conscience apparently requiring physical distance from what was about to happen. "Beautiful day for flying," Dad announced as I parked, his voice carrying forced optimism. "Phoenix will be warmer, but that's good for Dad's arthritis." Grandpa sat in the back seat dressed in his best travel clothes. Khakis, a polo shirt Mom had ironed, and his favorite Navy veteran cap. He looked small and vulnerable, trusting us to take care of him the way he'd taken care of us all these years. The weight of that trust pressed against my chest like a physical thing. "Good morning, Grandpa," I said, climbing in beside him. "Ready for your trip?" His face brightened with recognition. Yolanda, are you coming too? That's wonderful. Your grandmother will be so pleased. Mom's face tightened at the mention of Grandma, but she maintained her smile. Everyone's coming, Frank. It'll be like old times. The drive to Denver International Airport took 45 minutes each mile, increasing the tension inside the vehicle. Dad kept up a steady stream of chatter about Phoenix attractions, flight times, hotel amenities. Lies flowing so smoothly, I wondered if he'd convinced himself they were true. Marcus contributed occasional comments about golf courses and swimming pools, but his knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Grandpa dozed intermittently, waking confused each time and needing reassurance about where we were going. During one of his lucid moments, he squeezed my hand and whispered, "Watch them, not me." I understood. Even in his diminished state, he sensed the predators circling. Denver International Airport loomed ahead, its distinctive white peaks resembling snow-capped mountains or, from another angle, circus tents, fitting for the performance about to unfold. We parked in the short-term lot, Dad insisting on proximity for Frank's convenience. Every detail had been planned to seem caring while facilitating their scheme. Inside the terminal, the Saturday morning crowds provided both cover and witnesses. Dad steered us toward the check-in area, his hand firmly on Grandpa's elbow, controlling his movement. I noticed how he positioned himself between Grandpa and me, subtle but deliberate. "Let's get checked in first," Dad announced, producing tickets from his jacket. "Then we can grab coffee before security." I watched him distribute boarding passes, one for himself, Mom, and Marcus. Grandpa's passport remained in Dad's pocket, along with that single ticket to Guadalajara I knew was there. The international terminal was just one level up, easily accessible, but far enough away that Grandpa's absence wouldn't be immediately noticed when they went through domestic security. "I need to use the restroom," Mom said, her voice strained. "Yolanda, come with me." I recognized the divide and conquer tactic, but played along. In the bathroom, Mom turned to me with tears threatening her carefully applied makeup. "I know you hate us for this," she began, "but please just let it happen. It's for the best. The facility in Mexico has good reviews, the climate will help his health, and—" "Stop," I interrupted. "Just stop lying, at least to me. You're abandoning him because it's cheaper than caring for him properly, because Dad spent his money and now Grandpa's an inconvenience. At least have the courage to admit what you're doing." "You don't understand the pressure we're under," Mom insisted. "The bills, the house might be foreclosed. Marcus could lose his job if he can't focus. And Grandpa will lose his life," I shot back. "Alone, confused in a country where he doesn't speak the language in a facility that isn't even licensed. But hey, at least you'll save money on his care." Mom's face crumpled, but before she could respond, I left the bathroom. They could proceed with their plan, but I wouldn't give them the comfort of my complicity. Back in the terminal, I found them exactly where I'd expected, near a coffee shop on the edge of the food court with clear sight lines to both security checkpoints and the escalators to international departures. Dad had positioned Grandpa at a small table, his suitcase beside him, like a prop in their play. "Just sit here, Dad," he said, his voice carrying perfectly pitched concern. "We'll go check our bags and come right back. You rest and people watch. You always enjoyed that." Grandpa nodded agreeably, already distracted by the bustling terminal activity. Mom placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, and for a moment, I saw genuine emotion crack through her facade. But she said nothing, just patted him like one might pet a dog before taking it to the shelter. Marcus avoided eye contact entirely, mumbling something about getting coffee before quickly walking away. The coward couldn't even look at the man he was betraying. "I'll stay with Grandpa," I announced, moving toward the table. Dad's hand shot out, gripping my arm. "No, you come with us. He needs to get used to being independent. The travel will tire him out if we hover." "But independent?" I pulled my arm free. "He has Alzheimer's. He can't be independent." "Keep your voice down," Dad hissed, glancing around nervously. Several travelers had looked our way. "You're making a scene." "I haven't even started making a scene," I warned, but I stepped back. Let them think I was complying. I needed to see who they'd arranged to collect Grandpa. We moved as a group toward the check-in counters, Dad constantly checking over his shoulder. About 50 feet away, he stopped pulling out his phone. I need to make a call. Business thing. You all go ahead. I hung back, pretending to check my own phone while watching him. He spoke rapidly in hushed tones, occasionally glancing toward where Grandpa sat. Then I saw her. A middle-aged woman in medical scrubs with a lanyard bearing the Casa de Descanso logo standing near the international departure escalators. She nodded at whatever signal Dad gave. My blood boiled. They'd orchestrated every detail, even having someone pose as medical staff to make it seem legitimate when they took Grandpa. Any security concerns would be waved away by her official-looking presence. "Yolanda, are you coming?" Mom called out, her voice pitched with nervous energy. I rejoined them at the check-in counter, watching the charade of checking bags they'd never claimed, discussing seat assignments for flights Grandpa wouldn't take. The airline agent smiled and chatted, unaware she was an unwitting participant in elder abandonment. 20 minutes passed. 30. Dad kept checking his watch, synchronizing with whatever timeline he'd arranged with the facility. Mom's hands trembled as she pretended to organize travel documents. Marcus had disappeared entirely, probably unable to stomach watching the final act. "We should get Dad," I said loudly. "Security lines might be long." "In a minute," Dad replied, sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "Just need to confirm our gate." I'd seen enough. While they stalled, I walked back toward the coffee shop. But when I reached the spot where we'd left Grandpa, my heart stopped. The table was empty. Grandpa's suitcase remained abandoned like a memorial to their betrayal, but the man himself was gone. The woman in scrubs was nowhere to be seen. Panic coursed through me as I spun around, scanning the crowded terminal. "Grandpa," I called out, not caring who stared. "Frank Sullivan." A barista at the coffee shop looked up. The elderly gentleman. "Someone in scrubs came to get him about 5 minutes ago. Said she was taking him for a medical check before his flight." 5 minutes. They could be anywhere by now. I ran toward the international escalators, pushing through crowds searching for that Navy veteran cap among the sea of travelers. Behind me, I heard Dad calling my name, his voice angry rather than concerned. At the top of the escalator, the international departure area sprawled before me, even busier than below. Gates leading to Mexico, Canada, Europe. A maze of possibilities where one confused elderly man could disappear forever. I spotted a security guard and rushed over. "My grandfather," I gasped. "He has Alzheimer's. Someone took him. A woman in medical scrubs. He's confused. He doesn't know." The guard's expression shifted to concern. "When did this happen? What's his name?" As I provided details, I saw them from the corner of my eye. The woman in scrubs leading Grandpa toward a gate marked Guadalajara, boarding in 20 minutes. He walked slowly, uncertainly, looking around as if searching for familiar faces. "There," I pointed. "That's him." The guard spoke into his radio while I broke into a run. The woman saw me coming and quickened her pace, her grip firm on Grandpa's arm. But I was faster, fueled by rage and desperation. "Grandpa," I shouted. "Grandpa Frank." He turned at the sound of my voice, his face lighting up with recognition and relief. "Yolanda, I got lost. This nice nurse said she'd help me find you." I reached them just as airport security converged from multiple directions. The woman in scrubs tried to maintain her professional demeanor. "I'm from Casa de Descanso. I have authorization to escort Mr. Sullivan. His son arranged to abandon him." I interrupted. "This man has not consented to leave the country. He's being trafficked against his will." "That's a serious accusation," one of the security officers said. "Ma'am, can you provide documentation for this transfer?" The woman produced papers, all signed with the forgery I recognized as my father's attempt at Grandpa's signature, but she couldn't produce what mattered most: evidence that Grandpa understood or consented to where he was being taken. "Ask him," I demanded. "Ask my grandfather where he thinks he's going." The security officer turned to Grandpa, speaking gently. Sir, can you tell me where you're traveling today? Grandpa looked confused, glancing between me and the woman in scrubs. Phoenix, he said uncertainly, to see my daughter Linda, but this lady said we were going the wrong way. I can't remember. Linda passed away 2 years ago, I told the officers. My family lied to him. They're sending him to an unlicensed facility in Mexico. I have evidence. You need to come with us, the lead officer interrupted, but he was looking at the woman in scrubs, not me. All of you, we'll sort this out in our office. As they led us away from the gate, I saw my family rushing up the escalator. Dad's face was purple with rage, Mom crying, Marcus looking like he might vomit. They'd lost control of their carefully orchestrated plan, and now everyone would know what they'd attempted. But I only had eyes for Grandpa, who clung to my hand with surprising strength. I knew you'd come, he whispered. Even when I forget everything else I remember, you're the one who keeps me safe. The security office was crowded with airport personnel, the woman from Casa de Descanso, my family, and soon the Denver police officers Janet had contacted. What followed was a careful untangling of the conspiracy, aided by the evidence I'd gathered and recorded over the past weeks. Dad tried to bluster, claiming misunderstanding medical necessity, family rights, but the forged documents spoke louder than his protests. Mom sobbed, whether from shame or fear of consequences I couldn't tell. Marcus said nothing, staring at his shoes like a chastened child. Through it all, Grandpa sat beside me, sometimes clear, sometimes confused, but always trusting that I would handle whatever was happening. The weight of that trust had driven me to this moment, and I wouldn't fail him now. He's my father, Dad kept insisting. I have the right to make decisions about his care. Not when those decisions constitute abandonment and financial exploitation, the detective replied. Mr. Sullivan, you're being charged with attempted elder abuse, forgery, and fraud. You have the right to remain silent. As they led Dad away in handcuffs, he looked back at me with pure hatred. You destroyed this family, he spat. No, I replied calmly. You did that yourself when you decided Grandpa's life was worth less than his bank account. The security office at Denver International Airport felt suffocating despite its size. Officers separated us for individual questioning, while Grandpa sat in a comfortable chair, a kind airline employee bringing him coffee and talking gently about his military service to keep him calm. The woman from Casa de Descanso had been detained in another room, her professional facade cracking as the legal implications of her involvement became clear. I provided my recorded evidence to Detective Maria Santos, a middle-aged woman whose expression grew increasingly grim as she listened to weeks of planning deception and calculated cruelty. The recordings from the car ride, the photographs of forged documents, Grandpa's own letter stating his wishes. Each piece built an undeniable case of elder abuse. Your father was thorough, Detective Santos observed, reviewing the fake power of attorney documents. But not thorough enough. These signatures don't even require an expert to see they're forged. Through the glass partition, I watched another officer questioning Dad. His initial bluster had faded to desperate bargaining. Mom sat with a victim's advocate, alternating between tears and shocked silence. The elaborate lie had crumbled in less than 40 minutes, leaving nothing but the ugly truth of what they'd attempted. Miss Sullivan, Detective Santos continued, your grandfather is lucky to have you. Many of these cases don't get stopped in time. Elderly victims disappear into facilities across borders, and families claim they wandered off or went willingly. By the time anyone investigates, it's often too late. What happens now? I asked, though my eyes remained on Grandpa. He was showing the airline employee photos from his wallet, probably telling her about Grandma for the third time. Your father will be formally charged. The facility representative faces charges for attempted trafficking of a vulnerable adult. Your mother and brother, she paused, reviewing notes, their level of involvement will determine what charges they face. At minimum, they're accomplices to attempted elder abandonment. A knock interrupted us. Another officer entered with Marcus, who looked like he'd aged a decade in the past hour. "He wants to make a statement," the officer announced. Marcus couldn't meet my eyes as he spoke. I knew it was wrong. I knew from the beginning. But Dad promised. He said Grandpa would get good care, just more affordable. He showed us reviews photos. It looked nice. And we needed. Our daughter has health issues. Medical bills, I thought. You thought your daughter's needs outweighed your grandfather's life. I finished when he trailed off. That's not. I didn't think he'd be hurt. Dad said the climate would be good for him, that he'd have activities friends. I wanted to believe it. Detective Santos made notes without comment. In the world of elder abuse, Marcus's justifications were depressingly common. Family members convincing themselves that financial pressure justified abandoning their elderly relatives, that somehow it was for everyone's benefit. "The facility," I pressed. "Did you research it yourself?" Marcus's silence was answer enough. He'd taken Dad's word, chosen willful ignorance over due diligence, because the truth would have required him to act. Now that ignorance would cost him his freedom, his reputation, and possibly his marriage. The Casa de Descanso representative, identified as Mariah Gonzalez, proved more forthcoming once she realized the severity of her situation. According to her statement, this wasn't her first pickup at Denver International. The facility had arrangements with desperate families across the Southwest, collecting confused elderly patients from airports, bus stations, even rest stops. "We provide a service," she insisted to investigators. "These families can't afford American care. We offer an alternative." "You offer a warehouse where elderly people are sedated and forgotten," Detective Santos countered. "We've been investigating Casa de Descanso for 6 months. You prey on families in crisis and elderly victims who can't advocate for themselves." The revelation that Grandpa would have been just one of many victims made my stomach turn. How many other grandfathers and grandmothers had been led away by someone in fake scrubs, believing they were going to see family, only to disappear into a facility where no one spoke their language and family visits were forbidden for 3 months, long enough for them to forget or be forgotten. By noon, the initial questioning was complete. Dad had been formally arrested, his bond set high given the flight risk. Mom was released pending further investigation, though Adult Protective Services would be monitoring the situation. Marcus faced lesser charges, but still serious ones. Conspiracy to commit elder abuse carried significant penalties. The woman from Casa de Descanso faced the most serious charges: attempted kidnapping of a vulnerable adult, fraud, and operating as part of an organized elder trafficking ring. The FBI had been alerted, their investigation now expanding to include the Denver connection. Through it all, Grandpa remained blissfully unaware of the drama surrounding him. The airline employee, bless her, had kept him occupied with stories and snacks. When I finally collected him to leave, he seemed refreshed from his airport adventure. "Are we going to Phoenix now?" he asked hopefully. "No, Grandpa, we're going home." His face fell slightly. "But Linda would want you to be safe and comfortable," I said gently. "Let's go home and plan a different trip, okay? Maybe to the mountains you love." He considered this, then nodded. The mountains would be nice. Martha always loved the aspens in fall. Outside the airport, the Denver afternoon stretched bright and clear. I helped Grandpa into my car, securing his seatbelt, adjusting the air conditioning to his comfort. Such simple acts of care, things my family had been unwilling to continue providing. The drive home was quiet, except for the radio playing oldies from Grandpa's era. He hummed along to Moon River, tapping his fingers on his knee. In the rearview mirror, I watched him gazing out the window at the familiar landscape of home. The mountains in the distance, the prairie stretching endlessly, the sky that particular shade of Colorado blue. "I was scared," he said, suddenly his voice clear. "That woman, she smelled wrong, like disinfectant and lies. I wanted to run, but my legs don't work like they used to." "You don't have to be scared anymore," I promised. "You're safe now." Because of you. He reached forward to pat my shoulder. You came back. In the movies, someone always comes back for you, but in real life. He trailed off, the moment of clarity fading. At his house, still his for now despite Dad's forgery, I helped him inside. Everything looked the same as when we'd left this morning, but it felt different. The trust was broken, the family fractured beyond repair. Grandpa would need new arrangements for his care, new protections against those who should have protected him. Grace arrived within an hour, having been on standby all morning. She took in our exhausted faces and asked no questions, simply beginning the routine of settling Grandpa for an afternoon rest. I sat at his kitchen table, the same one where 3 weeks ago Dad had announced his plans and tried to process what had just happened. My phone buzzed with messages. Friends who'd seen social media posts about the airport incident, extended family demanding explanations, a text from Patricia saying simply, "Thank you." I ignored them all. There would be time for explanations later. Right now, I needed to focus on next steps. Janet Blackwood called with updates. "The prosecutor is taking this very seriously. Your father's looking at significant jail time. The forged house sale alone is major fraud, combined with the attempted abandonment, the theft of assets. Yolanda, he's going away for years." "Good," I said and meant it. The man who'd raised me, who taught me to ride a bike and attended my college graduation, had revealed himself capable of monstrous cruelty. That version of my father, if he'd ever truly existed, was as dead as Grandma. "There's more," Janet continued. "The investigation into Casa de Descanso is expanding rapidly. The FBI wants to interview you and your grandfather when he's able. This could help shut down their entire operation." A small comfort. Grandpa's near tragedy might save others from the same fate. He'd appreciate that, I thought. Even in his confusion, he remained someone who wanted to help others. That evening, I sat with Grandpa as he ate dinner. Grace had made his favorite meatloaf, and he attacked it with good appetite. Between bites, he shared fragments of memory, stories of his military service meeting Grandma raising his children. No mention of the morning's events at the airport. Perhaps that was a mercy. "You know what I miss most," he said suddenly. "Trust. When you get old, everyone starts making decisions for you, like you're a child again. But children grow up and get their freedom back. Old people just lose more of it every day." "You haven't lost your freedom," I assured him. "You're still in charge of your life." He smiled sadly. "No, sweetheart, but I'm lucky. I have you to make sure I don't lose my dignity along with everything else." My phone rang, Mom calling for the 5th time. This time I answered. "Yolanda, please," she began, her voice raw from crying. "You have to understand. We never meant for it to go this far. Your father said it would be simple, that Frank would be cared for." "Stop," I interrupted. "Just stop. You stood there and let Dad position Grandpa like a piece of lost luggage. You knew exactly what was happening. You chose money over his life." "It wasn't about money," she protested. "It was about survival. We're losing everything, the house, the business, our retirement. We're in our 60s, Yolanda. What are we supposed to do?" "Not abandon your father-in-law in a foreign country," I suggested coldly. "Not forge documents, not steal from him. There are program services, legitimate help available. You chose the criminal path because it was easier." "He's going to prison," she whispered. "Your father. My husband of 35 years is going to prison because you couldn't let us handle family business privately." "He's going to prison because he committed multiple felonies," I corrected, "and you're lucky you're not joining him, though that might still happen depending on how the investigation goes." The silence stretched between us, years of family dinners and shared holidays poisoned by their choices. Finally, she spoke again, her voice smaller. "What's going to happen to Frank now?" "He'll be cared for by people who actually care about him," I said. "I'm filing for guardianship. He'll stay in his home as long as possible with proper help. When he needs facility care, it will be somewhere he's treated with dignity, not warehoused and forgotten." "You can't afford—" "I'll figure it out. People do it every day without resorting to trafficking their relatives. She hung up without another word. I doubted we'd speak again anytime soon, if ever. The mother I'd thought I knew had died the moment she adjusted Grandpa's collar at the airport and walked away. As night fell, I helped Grace settle Grandpa for bed. He was tired but peaceful, the trauma of the morning lost in the maze of his failing memory. A blessing, perhaps, that he wouldn't remember his son's betrayal, wouldn't carry that pain alongside his confusion. "Will you stay a while?" he asked, as I tucked him in the same words I'd said to him countless nights as a child afraid of the dark. "Of course," I promised, settling into the chair beside his bed. He fell asleep quickly, his breathing evening out into gentle snores. I sat in the darkness, standing guard against the monsters that had turned out to be his own family. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and social workers, police interviews, and medical evaluations. We'd begin the long process of protecting him legally from those who should have protected him naturally. But tonight he slept safely in his own bed, in his own home, surrounded by his own memories. The airport plot had failed. The family was shattered, trust, destroyed, futures forever altered. Dad would trade his business suits for prison orange. Mom would live with her choices in an empty house. Marcus would struggle to explain to his daughter someday why her grandfather went to prison for trying to abandon her great-grandfather. And Grandpa, he'd continue his journey through Alzheimer's with dignity intact, supported by people who saw him as more than a financial burden. It wasn't the ending anyone had planned, but it was the one Grandpa deserved. I must have dozed off in the chair because I woke to Grandpa's voice in the darkness. He was talking in his sleep, clear as day. "Thank you for coming back, sweetheart. I knew you would. Good granddaughters always come back." Even unconscious, even lost in dreams and failing memory, he knew he was loved. That would have to be enough to build on. Everything else, the legal battles, the family destruction, the financial struggles ahead, would be faced one day at a time. But we'd face them together, Grandpa and I. Because that's what real family does. They show up, they stay, and they never, ever walk away when things get hard. Dad had taught me that lesson, just not the way he'd intended. The first battle was won. The war for Grandpa's dignity and care had just begun. The fluorescent lights of the airport security office had burned the scene into my memory. Dad in handcuffs, Mom's collapsed expression, the Casa de Descanso woman's failed attempt to maintain professional composure. But as I burst from that office, only one thing mattered. Grandpa was missing. Again. He was just here. I gasped to the security supervisor, gesturing wildly at the empty waiting area where we'd left him with the airline employee. She was watching him talking about his service. The supervisor's radio crackled to life before I could finish. "We have a situation at gate B52. Elderly male confused refusing to board. Says he's waiting for his granddaughter." B52, the opposite end of the terminal from where we were. How had he gotten there so quickly, and more importantly, who had taken him? "That's him," I said, already moving. "He has Alzheimer's. He doesn't know." "Ma'am, we've got teams heading there now," the supervisor assured me, matching my pace as we rushed through the terminal. "But I need you to understand, we have another problem, the woman from the facility. She made a call before we confiscated her phone. There might be others here." Others, of course. An operation trafficking elderly people through major airports wouldn't rely on a single employee. My mind raced as we navigated through crowds of travelers. How many Casa de Descanso operatives were scattered through Denver International right now? How many confused elderly people were being led away while their families completed the charade of checking in for flights never intended to be taken? We rounded a corner and I spotted him. Grandpa's Navy veteran cap visible above the crowd near a gate marked Houston, now boarding. But something was wrong. He wasn't alone. A different woman, also in medical scrubs but younger, had her arm linked through his, speaking earnestly while trying to guide him toward the jetway. "Stop her!" I shouted, breaking into a full run. Security was already converging, but the woman saw them coming. Instead of fleeing, she doubled down, raising her voice in practiced concern. "Mr. Sullivan is confused. I'm his traveling nurse. His family arranged for me to accompany him to his care facility. He's becoming agitated. Please don't make this worse." Several passengers stepped back the scene, playing into every stereotype about difficult dementia patients and their caregivers. The woman was good, I'd give her that. She'd turned potential witnesses into her allies with just a few well-chosen words. But she'd made one mistake. She'd used Grandpa's name. "How do you know his name?" I demanded, pushing through the security perimeter. "If you're his traveling nurse, where are his medical records, his medication list? What's his diagnosis? What medications is he on?" The woman's composure flickered. "I don't need to answer to you. His son hired me. His son is in custody for elder abuse." Detective Santos announced, having followed us from the security office. "And now you're going to join him. Step away from Mr. Sullivan immediately." The crowd's sympathy evaporated. Phones came out recording the confrontation. The woman released Grandpa's arm but didn't back down. "I have documentation," she insisted, reaching for a folder in her bag. "Show forged documentation," I countered, "just like your colleague had. How many of you are here today? How many elderly people are you planning to kidnap?" Grandpa, freed from her grip, looked around in bewilderment. The noise, the crowds, the uniformed officers. It was overwhelming for anyone, let alone someone with dementia. I saw the panic building in his eyes, the way he pressed back against the gate counter, hands shaking as he tried to process the chaos. "Grandpa," I called softly, approaching slowly. "It's Yolanda. You're safe. I'm here to take you home." His eyes found mine, relief flooding his features. "I got lost again," he said, voice trembling. "The first lady said she was taking me to you, but then she left. Then this one came, but she smelled like that cleaning stuff at the hospital. I don't like hospitals." "No hospitals," I promised, gently taking his hand. "We're going home." Detective Santos had the second woman in custody now, but her radio was buzzing with new reports. 3 more elderly people had been found wandering the terminal, apparently abandoned, when their supposed escorts realized the operation was compromised. An entire network was unraveling in real time. "We need to lock down the airport," Santos told the security supervisor. "No elderly passengers leave without verification of their travel companions, and pull all security footage from the last 3 hours. I want to know how many of these vultures are operating here." While they coordinated the response, I focused on Grandpa. He was shaking, overwhelmed by the noise and confusion. I guided him to a quieter area, a small chapel tucked between gates where the chaos felt muted. We sat on a bench, his hand gripping mine like a lifeline. "I want to go home," he said repeatedly. "Just want to go home." "We will," I assured him. "Just a few more minutes. The police need to make sure everyone is safe." An airport EMT stopped by to check his vitals, concerned about the stress of the ordeal. Grandpa submitted to the blood pressure cuff, but kept his eyes on me, needing the anchor of familiar faces in the chaos. His pressure was elevated, but not dangerously so. The EMT recommended we get him home soon, advice I was desperate to follow. My phone rang. Grace calling, worried sick after hearing news reports about an elder trafficking ring bust at DIA. I assured her we were safe, that we'd be home within hours. She promised to have tea ready and his favorite blanket warming in the dryer. The simple kindness of it, the promise of ordinary comforts, nearly broke my composure. Detective Santos found us in the chapel an hour later, her expression grim but satisfied. "We've identified at least 6 operatives working the airport today. 4 elderly victims besides your grandfather, all in various stages of being processed for flights to Mexico. All safe now, families being notified." "How long has this been happening?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. "Based on preliminary interviews, months, possibly years. Casa de Descanso has similar operations at airports in Phoenix, Albuquerque, El Paso, always targeting families in financial distress, always promising affordable care, always requiring that 90-day no-visit period. By the time families realize the conditions, their loved ones have either died or deteriorated beyond recovery. The scale of it staggered me. Grandpa wasn't just escaping a family betrayal, he was surviving an entire industry built on exploiting the vulnerable. How many others hadn't been so lucky? How many were trapped in facilities right now forgotten by families who'd convinced themselves it was for the best? Your grandfather's testimony will be crucial, Santos continued. When he's able, we'll need him to identify the women who tried to take him. But for now, get him home. He's been through enough today. The journey out of the airport felt surreal. We passed gates where families, reunited business travelers rushed to connections. Vacationers laughed over coffee. Normal life continuing while our family imploded. Grandpa dozed against my shoulder as we waited for the parking shuttle, exhausted by trauma he'd hopefully forget by tomorrow. In the parking garage, I found Dad's SUV where Marcus had abandoned it, keys still in the ignition in his panic to flee. A metaphor for their entire plan, carefully orchestrated but ultimately abandoned when consequences arrived. I left it there. Let them figure out their own messes from now on. The drive home was quiet, Grandpa sleeping fitfully in the passenger seat. I took the long way, avoiding the interstate, in favor of familiar suburban streets. Past the library where he'd taken me for story time, the park where he'd taught me to fish in the small pond, the ice cream shop where he'd consoled me after my first heartbreak. A lifetime of memories layered over these ordinary places. I know this street, he mumbled, waking as we turned onto his block. This is home. Yes, I agreed, pulling into his driveway. You're home. Inside, Grace had worked her magic. The house smelled like fresh bread, soft jazz played on the radio, and Grandpa's favorite armchair waited with that promised warm blanket. He settled into it with a deep sigh, the tension finally leaving his shoulders. No more trips, he announced firmly. I'm staying right here. Absolutely, I agreed. No more trips. Grace brought him tea and toast, ordinary comfort food that seemed like a feast after the morning's ordeal. I stepped onto the back porch to make necessary calls. To Janet about next steps, to Patricia, checking on her emotional state, to my own supervisor, explaining I'd need extended leave to handle the aftermath. Through the window, I watched Grandpa chatting with Grace about the birds at his feeder, pointing out the different species with the expertise of someone who'd watched them for decades. In this moment in his own space, the confusion lifted enough for him to be himself. Not a patient or a victim or a burden, just Frank Sullivan, bird enthusiast and grandfather. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. I'm sorry, I know that's not enough, but I'm sorry. I deleted it without responding. Sorry didn't undo the planning, the lies, the willingness to abandon Grandpa for money. Sorry didn't erase the image of that woman trying to lead him onto a plane to a life of medicated oblivion. Sorry was what you said when you spilled coffee, not when you tried to traffic your grandfather. As afternoon faded to evening, more details emerged. The FBI raid on Casa de Descanso's offices in Guadalajara had uncovered records of hundreds of elderly Americans, many of whom had died within months of arrival. The facility's doctors had been prescribing powerful sedatives to keep patients manageable, leading to falls, aspiration, pneumonia, and rapid cognitive decline. What my family had planned wasn't just abandonment, it was a potential death sentence. But we'd stopped it. Grandpa was safe in his chair, Grace was making dinner, and tomorrow we'd begin the legal process of ensuring this never happened again. It wasn't the victory I'd wanted. That would have been in a family that never considered such betrayal in the first place. But it was the victory we'd achieved. That night, after Grace left and Grandpa was safely in bed, I sat at his kitchen table with a cup of tea and tried to process the day. In 12 hours, I'd gone from daughter and granddaughter to whistleblower and guardian. I'd saved Grandpa, but destroyed my family. I'd exposed a trafficking ring, but ensured my father would spend his remaining years in prison. The weight of it all pressed down like a physical thing, but then I heard Grandpa's gentle snoring from his bedroom safe in his own bed and knew I'd make the same choice again. Love wasn't just about comfort when it was easy. It was about protection when it was hard. It was about choosing someone's dignity over your own convenience, their safety over your financial security. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, legal proceedings, care arrangements, family fallout. But tonight, Grandpa was home. The wolves had been driven off. The search was over. And in his sleep, I heard him mumble what sounded like, "Thank you." Even if he forgot everything else, some part of him knew he was safe. That had to be enough for now. Sunday morning arrived with the harsh reality of legal consequences. I'd barely slept, alternating between checking on Grandpa and fielding calls from family members, just learning about Saturday's events. By 8 a.m., Detective Santos was at the door with a victim advocate named Caroline Reeves, ready to begin the formal process of documenting the attempted trafficking. "Mr. Sullivan needs to be interviewed while his memory of events is fresh," Detective Santos explained as we sat in Grandpa's living room. "I understand his condition makes this challenging, but his testimony is crucial for prosecution." Grandpa, dressed in his Sunday best out of habit, despite not attending church in months, sat upright in his armchair trying to follow the conversation. He'd had a good night's sleep and seemed clearer than he'd been in weeks, as if the shock of yesterday had temporarily sharpened his focus. "Frank," Caroline said gently, "we need to ask you about what happened at the airport yesterday. Is that okay?" He nodded, then looked at me. "Yolanda stays—" "Of course I stay," I assured him, moving my chair closer to his. The interview was painful, but necessary. Detective Santos skillfully guided Grandpa through the events patient when he confused details or drifted into unrelated memories. What emerged was a heartbreaking picture of an elderly man aware enough to sense danger, but unable to fully process or prevent what was happening. The first woman asked she had a clipboard. Grandpa recalled his hands mimicking holding one, said she was there to help me get to my daughter, but I knew something was wrong. She kept rushing, wouldn't let me finish my coffee. "Did she show you any identification?" Santos asked. "A badge, with her picture, but the writing was all—" He gestured vaguely. "Different. Not English. I asked her about it and she got upset. Said I asked too many questions." Caroline made notes while Santos continued the questioning. Each detail Grandpa remembered. The woman's accent, her blue scrubs, the way she'd gripped his arm too tightly, built the prosecution's case. But the effort was exhausting him. After 30 minutes, we took a break. While Grandpa rested, Santos updated me on the broader investigation. "Your father's in county lockup. Bail was denied given the circumstances. Your mother and brother were released on their own recognizance, but with strict conditions. No contact with Frank. No access to his finances or property." "What are they charged with?" I asked, surprised to find I felt nothing at the news of Dad's imprisonment. "Your father faces the most serious charges: attempted elder trafficking, financial exploitation, forgery, fraud, and conspiracy. Looking at 15 to 20 years if convicted on all counts. Your mother and brother are charged as accomplices, facing 5 to 10 years, though deals might be offered if they cooperate fully." 15 to 20 years. Dad was 62. He might die in prison. The man who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd walked me down the aisle at graduation since I'd asked him, instead of having a traditional wedding, would spend his final years behind bars. I waited for guilt or regret to surface. Neither came. "There's more," Santos continued. "The Casa de Descanso investigation has exploded. The FBI raided 12 locations across 4 states this morning. Hundreds of families are learning their elderly relatives aren't in the nice facilities they were promised. It's going to be on national news within hours." My phone on silent lit up with incoming calls. area codes from across the country. Families desperate to know if their loved ones were among the victims. I let them go to voicemail. Today, I could only handle my own family's tragedy. When we resumed the interview, Santos shifted focus to the financial crimes. Frank, did your son ask you to sign any papers recently? Grandpa's face darkened, a flash of his old sharpness returning. Always with papers. Just sign here, Dad. It's for taxes. It's for insurance. But I'm not stupid. Not yet. I knew something was wrong when he wanted me to sign over the house. You didn't sign, Caroline asked hopefully. I can't remember. Sometimes my hand does things. He looked at his right hand with distrust, as if it had betrayed him. Did I sign something bad? We're looking into that, Santos said gently. You did the right thing by being suspicious. The doorbell interrupted us. Marcus stood on the porch unshaven and hollow-eyed. Behind him, Patricia held their daughter, her face set with determination. You can't be here, I said through the steel-chain door. There's a no-contact order. Please, Marcus begged. Just 2 minutes. Patricia has something to say about evidence. It could help Grandpa. I glanced back at Detective Santos, who nodded. Let them in, but any violation of the protection order and they're arrested. In the living room, Marcus couldn't look at Grandpa, who watched him with confusion. Marcus! You look terrible, son. Are you sick? The simple grandfatherly concern broke something in my brother. Tears streaming, he dropped to his knees beside Grandpa's chair. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I knew it was wrong, and I let it happen anyway. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but... Marcus, Patricia interrupted sharply. The evidence. Stay focused. She turned to Detective Santos, shifting the baby to one hip. I've been documenting everything for weeks. Screenshots of emails between David and the facility, recordings of phone calls where they discussed the planned bank statements showing the money transfers. I hoped Marcus would come to his senses, so I gathered proof to protect us if things went bad. From her diaper bag, the last place anyone would look for evidence, she produced a flash drive. Everything's here, including a conversation from last month where David laughed about how the old man would never know what hit him, where he called his own father a gold mine wrapped in dementia. The cruelty of that phrase hung in the air. Grandpa thankfully had drifted into one of his absent moments, humming quietly while petting an imaginary cat. But the rest of us felt the weight of such calculated callousness. Santos took the flash drive carefully. Why didn't you come forward sooner? Patricia's composure cracked slightly. Because I'm a coward. Because we needed money. Because I convinced myself it would somehow work out. But yesterday, when I heard what happened at the airport, I imagined someone doing that to my father someday, and I couldn't live with myself anymore. This evidence could be crucial, Santos said, but you understand it implicates your husband further. Marcus spoke up, his voice raw. I know, but it's the right thing. Finally doing the right thing. They left after Marcus whispered another apology to Grandpa, who patted his head absently, like he was still a child needing comfort. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The man they tried to abandon still offering the unconditional love they'd betrayed. The afternoon brought a parade of officials. Adult Protective Services conducted their assessment, determining Grandpa was at risk, but could remain home with proper support. A forensic accountant arrived to begin untangling the financial crimes, discovering Dad had already stolen over $200,000 from Grandpa's accounts through forged checks and unauthorized transfers. The house sale was never completed, the accountant Mr. Chen explained with visible relief. The forgery was so obvious the title company flagged it. Your grandfather's home is safe. One piece of good news in an ocean of betrayal. Grandpa dozed through most of the financial discussion, worn out by the morning's emotional toll. Grace arrived for her shift, taking in the chaos with professional calm, creating a buffer of normalcy in the storm. By evening, exhaustion weighed on everyone. Detective Santos prepared to leave, promising updates as the investigation progressed. Your grandfather did amazingly well today. His testimony combined with Patricia's evidence and the documentation you provided gives us an airtight case. What happens to the other victims? I asked. The elderly people already in Mexico. Santos's expression darkened. The State Department's involved now. It's complicated. Mexican authorities have to cooperate. Families have to be located and verified. Victims need immediate medical assessment. Some have been there for months. The condition they're in? She shook her head. Your grandfather escaped a nightmare. After everyone left, I sat with Grandpa during dinner. Grace had made soup easy for him to manage as his coordination worsened with fatigue. Between spoonfuls, he shared fragments of thought jumping between decades without warning. That policeman was nice, he said suddenly. Reminded me of Tommy Chen from the Force. You remember Tommy retired in '98. No, wait, that was someone else. The detective today was also very nice. I agreed, not correcting his confusion. Someone's in trouble, he continued, frowning. Big trouble, but I can't remember who. Was it me? Did I do something wrong? No, Grandpa, you did everything right. You're the bravest person I know. He smiled at that, the worry lines easing. Your grandmother used to say that. Said I was brave for leaving the farm, joining the Navy, asking her to dance at that USO party. But that wasn't brave. That was just love making me stupid enough to take chances. Maybe that's what bravery is, I suggested. Love making us strong enough to do hard things. He considered this, then nodded. You're brave too, then. Whatever you did, I might not remember tomorrow, but I know you were brave for me. The simple acknowledgement undid me. After maintaining composure through police interviews and family confrontations, I finally cried. Grandpa patted my hand with gentle confusion, not understanding my tears, but offering comfort nonetheless. That night, I stayed over, sleeping on the couch where I could hear if he needed anything. The house felt different now. No longer just Grandpa's home, but a fortress I'd helped defend against those who would have stolen it. Every photo on the wall, every piece of furniture, every memory soaked into these rooms had almost been lost to greed and desperation. My phone showed 57 missed calls, texts from relatives I hadn't heard from in years, emails from reporters who'd somehow gotten my contact information. The story was breaking nationally. Family attempts to traffic elderly. Father to Mexican facility, read one headline. Our private tragedy had become public scandal. But in the darkness of Grandpa's living room, none of that mattered. What mattered was the sound of his peaceful breathing from the bedroom safe in his own bed. What mattered was tomorrow's home health aide visit, the follow-up with his real doctor, the meeting with the elder law attorney to establish protective guardianship. What mattered was that we'd won this battle, even if the war for his dignity and care would continue as long as his illness progressed. Each day would bring new challenges as Alzheimer's stole more of his memory, his function, his essence. But he'd face those challenges here, surrounded by people who saw him as a person worthy of respect, not a problem to be solved or a goldmine to be exploited. The clock chimed midnight, technically Monday now. In the morning, I'd face the wreckage of my family, the legal proceedings, the financial untangling. But for these quiet hours, I stood guard over Grandpa's sleep, the same way he'd once stood guard over mine when nightmares struck. Love making us brave enough to do hard things. He'd taught me that, without meaning to, just by being who he was. And I'd keep proving that lesson true no matter what battles lay ahead. Monday morning brought the full weight of consequences crashing down on what remained of the Sullivan family. The doorbell rang at 7 a.m. sharp. Child Protective Services had arrived to interview Marcus and Patricia, investigating whether their involvement in elder abuse indicated potential risk to their infant daughter. I watched from Grandpa's kitchen window as 2 social workers entered my brother's house across the street. He'd moved there 3 years ago, claiming he wanted to be close to help with Grandpa. Now that proximity seemed like another calculated move in Dad's long game of financial exploitation. Who's visiting Marcus? Grandpa asked, joining me at the window with his morning coffee. Are they selling something I told him not to buy from door-to-door people? Just some people who need to talk to him, I said vaguely. No need to burden him with the ongoing demolition of our family. Grace arrived to help with Grandpa's morning routine while I fielded calls from attorneys. The family lawyer Dad had retained for years wanted nothing to do with the case. 3 criminal defense attorneys had already declined to represent him after reviewing the charges. Mom had hired her own counsel, distancing herself legally from Dad's actions. The first smart move she'd made in months. By 10 a.m., the CPS investigation had expanded to my doorstep. The lead social worker, Ms. Rodriguez, was thorough but fair, recognizing that my actions had been protective rather than harmful. We're not concerned about Mr. Sullivan's safety in your care, she assured me after interviewing both Grandpa and me, but we need to understand the family dynamics that led to this situation. Were there warning signs you noticed earlier? I thought back to birthday dinners where Dad would joke about Grandpa living too long, holiday gatherings where Mom would fret about the cost of his medications, Marcus's increasing interest in Grandpa's financial statements. The signs had been there, accumulating like storm clouds I'd chosen not to see until lightning struck. They were struggling financially, I admitted, but I never thought they'd go this far. I thought family meant something. Ms. Rodriguez made notes without judgment. Financial stress can bring out the worst in people. What matters now is ensuring Mr. Sullivan's ongoing safety and well-being. Across the street, the scene at Marcus's house was escalating. Through the window, I could see Patricia gesturing animatedly while Marcus sat with his head in his hands. Their baby's cries carried across the yard. The perfect suburban family facade was crumbling in real time. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Can we talk, please? I ignored it. She'd made her choice at that airport, adjusting Grandpa's collar before abandoning him. Whatever she had to say, couldn't undo that moment of betrayal. Grandpa noticed my tension. You're worried, he observed with unexpected clarity. Is it about money? I have some saved? Well, I think I do, unless I spend it already. Did I spend it? Your money is safe, I assured him. I'm making sure of that. He nodded, satisfied, then frowned. Someone was supposed to take my money, but you stopped them. The memory was fragmentary, but the emotion remained. You're good at stopping bad things. The morning mail brought legal documents, a summons for Grandpa to appear as a witness in the criminal proceedings, though his condition would likely require special accommodations. Janet Blackwood had already filed for emergency guardianship, fast-tracking the process given the circumstances. Within weeks, I'd have legal authority to protect Grandpa from any further family predation. Around lunchtime, Patricia appeared at the door alone. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her usually perfect appearance disheveled. They're taking Lily, she said without preamble. Temporary foster placement while they investigate, because of what we did, what we almost did. Part of me wanted to feel sympathy. The other part remembered her sitting silent during family dinners while they planned Grandpa's abandonment. You made choices, I said simply. These are consequences. I know, she wiped her eyes with a crumpled tissue. I'm not here for pity. I'm here because Marcus is falling apart and someone needs to be the adult. I've left him. This was unexpected. Left him. Packed what I could this morning. Lily and I are going to my mother's in Colorado Springs, when CPS clears it anyway. I can't be married to someone who would do that to his own grandfather, who would choose money over family. I thought I knew him, but the man I married wouldn't have. She broke down completely. Despite my anger, I let her in, guiding her to the kitchen table while Grandpa napped in his chair. Grace brought her water and tissues with the practiced kindness of someone who'd seen many family crises. I keep thinking, Patricia said when she could speak again, what if that was my daughter 40 years from now? Confused, scared, being led away by strangers, because we decided she was too expensive to care for properly. How do you live with that possibility? You don't, I said honestly. That's why I stopped it. She pulled out a manila envelope, hands shaking. I found more evidence. Marcus kept recordings of conversations with David, insurance he called it in case things went wrong. He knew it was wrong from the beginning but documented everything to protect himself, except he never protected the one person who needed it. Inside were USB drives, printed emails, text, message screenshots. The conspiracy laid bare in digital detail. Dad orchestrating every move, Mom enabling through silence, Marcus collaborating for promised payoffs. And throughout it all, references to Grandpa as the problem, the burden, the asset, never as a person, never as a man who'd raised them, loved them, given them everything. There's a recording from 2 months ago, Patricia continued, her voice hollow. David laughing about how confused Frank was getting, saying it was perfect timing, that by the time he realized what happened, he wouldn't remember enough to testify. They were counting on his illness to protect them. The cruelty of it stole my breath, using Grandpa's vulnerability as a shield for their crimes. I thought of him in his chair, trusting us to care for him, while his own son plotted to exploit his confusion. "What do you want me to do with this?" I asked Patricia. "Give it to the police, all of it. I don't want Marcus protected anymore. He made his choice, and it wasn't Lily and me. It wasn't basic human decency. Let him face whatever comes." She left shortly after, shoulders straighter despite her tears. Sometimes rock bottom was where people found their spine. I hoped for her daughter's sake that Patricia's newfound courage would last. The afternoon brought a call from Detective Santos with updates. The Casa de Descanso network is unraveling faster than expected. We've identified over 300 victims across 5 states. The FBI is treating this as a major trafficking operation. Your family's case broke it wide open. "How many are still alive?" I asked, dreading the answer. "About 60%. The others, the conditions in these facilities, the lack of proper medical care, the sedation to keep them manageable. Your grandfather is lucky, Ms. Sullivan. Another few months, and the statistics suggest—" She didn't need to finish. I understood. Dad hadn't just tried to abandon Grandpa, he'd tried to sign his death warrant. That evening, Marcus appeared at the door. He looked destroyed, face-gaunt clothes wrinkled the confident businessman facade, completely shattered. "Patricia left," he said unnecessarily. "Took Lily. CPS says I can't see her unsupervised. My own daughter." "What did you expect?" I asked, blocking the doorway. "You tried to traffic your grandfather. Did you think there wouldn't be consequences?" "I didn't think—" He stopped, shoulders sagging. "That's the problem. I didn't think at all. Just followed Dad's lead like always. Did what he said would solve our problems. And now I've lost everything." "Grandpa almost lost everything," I corrected. "His home, his dignity, his life. You lost things you threw away yourself." He looked past me to where Grandpa sat watching television, oblivious to the drama at his door. "Can I apologize to him?" "Properly this time." "No, the protection order stands. And honestly, Marcus, your apology is more for you than him. He doesn't need to carry your guilt along with everything else." Marcus left without another word. Through the window, I watched him return to his empty house, shoulders bent like a man twice his age. Choices and consequences. The bill always came due eventually. That night, I received an unexpected call. Aunt Linda's daughter, my cousin Sarah, who lived in Seattle. We hadn't spoken in years beyond holiday cards. "I just saw the news," she said without preamble, "about Uncle Frank and what David tried to do. I'm flying out tomorrow. Someone from the family needs to support you through this, and clearly the local relatives have lost their minds." The relief of family support, even from an unexpected quarter, nearly undid me. "You don't have to—" "Yes, I do. Uncle Frank sent me money for college when my parents couldn't afford it. He never asked for anything back, never held it over me. Just said, family helps family. Well, I'm returning the favor. What do you need?" What I needed was help navigating the legal maze ahead, someone to stay with Grandpa during court appearances, emotional support, as I watched my immediate family implode. Sarah promised all of that and more. Mom's flying out too, she added. The real Linda, not the imaginary Phoenix version David invented. She's furious. Said if her brother wasn't already in jail, she'd put him there herself for what he tried to do to their father. Family fractures, but sometimes the break revealed stronger bonds underneath. The relatives who'd stayed distant were stepping forward while those closest had revealed their rot. Grandpa would have family support, just not from the people he'd have expected. Late that evening, Mom finally appeared in person. I met her on the porch, unwilling to let her inside. She looked older, defeated, expensive clothes hanging loose on her shrinking frame. "I know you hate me," she began. "I don't hate you," I corrected. "I nothing you. You stood there and let it happen. Worse, you helped plan it. That's not something I can forgive or forget." "We were desperate," she whispered. "The debt, the failing business, the house about to be foreclosed. David said it would save us all." "It would have killed Grandpa to save your credit score," I shot back, "and you knew it. Somewhere under all your justifications, you knew sending him to that place was a death sentence, but you chose your comfort over his life." She flinched but didn't deny it. "What happens now? Now you live with your choices. Dad goes to prison. You probably get probation if you cooperate fully. Marcus loses his family, and Grandpa gets the care he deserves from people who actually love him. The family you knew is dead. You killed it at that airport." I went back inside, locking the door on my mother and the lifetime of relationship she destroyed. Through the front window, I watched her sit in her car for 20 minutes before finally driving away. The woman who'd raised me taught me manners, hosted holiday dinners, had revealed herself capable of monstrous indifference to suffering. That was her burden to carry now. Grandpa had fallen asleep in his chair, the TV playing an old Western. I turned it off and covered him with his blanket, watching him breathe peacefully, unaware of the family destruction swirling around him. Maybe that was a mercy. Let him remember the good years, the family that loved him, not the one that tried to throw him away. Tomorrow would bring more revelations, more legal proceedings, more consequences for choices made in greed and desperation. But tonight, in this quiet house, love stood guard against those who would harm the vulnerable. The family was fractured beyond repair, but from those breaks, something stronger was emerging. A family of choice, not just blood. A family that showed up when it mattered. A family that understood love meant protection, not profit. It wasn't the family Grandpa had raised, but it was the one he deserved. The clock chimed 10, and I helped him to bed, maintaining the routines that anchored him in increasingly chaotic times. Whatever storms tomorrow brought, he'd weather them, surrounded by people who saw his worth beyond his bank account. That had to be enough. It was all I had to give. Tuesday morning arrived with a parade of legal professionals transforming Grandpa's modest living room into an impromptu law office. Janet Blackwood, the elder law attorney, had assembled a team that included a financial crime specialist, a guardianship expert, and a victims' rights advocate. The dining table disappeared under boxes of evidence, legal precedents, and financial records dating back decades. "This is bigger than just your family now," Janet explained, organizing documents with practiced efficiency. "The FBI wants to use your grandfather's case as the centerpiece of their prosecution against the entire Casa de Descanso network. He's become the face of elderly trafficking victims." Grandpa, obvious to his newfound legal significance, sat in his armchair working on a crossword puzzle Grace had given him. Occasionally, he'd look up at the lawyers with mild interest, as if watching a television show he couldn't quite follow, but found pleasant enough. "Six-letter word for betrayal," he muttered, tapping his pencil against the newspaper. "Starts with TR. "Or treason," I suggested softly, the irony not lost on me. "That's it," he smiled, filling in the squares with shaky handwriting. "Treason. When someone betrays their country, or their family. Same thing, really. The lawyers exchanged glances. Even in his confusion, truth had a way of surfacing. Robert Chen, the financial crimes specialist, spread bank statements across the coffee table. Your father was systematic. Over 18 months, he siphoned nearly 300,000 from your grandfather's accounts. Small amounts at first, a few thousand here and there labeled as home repairs or medical expenses, then larger chunks as he grew bolder. How did the banks not notice? I asked, studying the highlighted transfers. He was listed as a secondary on most accounts, supposedly to help with bills if your grandfather became incapacitated. The banks saw an authorized user making seemingly legitimate transactions. It's a common elder fraud pattern, family members exploiting their access. Each revelation felt like another wound. Dad hadn't just decided to abandon Grandpa on a desperate whim. He'd been stealing from him systematically for over a year, planning this outcome from the beginning. The family dinners, the concerned son act, all performed while he emptied his father's accounts. There's more, Janet added grimly. We've discovered your father took out 3 credit cards in your grandfather's name, maxed them out, and made minimum payments from Frank's checking account. Another 40,000 in debt your grandfather didn't know existed. I looked at Grandpa, still focused on his puzzle, and felt rage burn through me. This man who'd lived frugally his entire life, who'd saved carefully for retirement, who still clipped coupons despite having healthy savings, had been robbed blind by his own son. The doorbell interrupted our legal strategy session. Sarah, my cousin from Seattle, stood on the porch with 2 suitcases and fierce determination on her face. Behind her, Aunt Linda, the real one very much alive despite Dad's lies, looked ready for war. "Where is he?" Linda demanded, pushing past me. "Where's Dad?" She stopped short, seeing Grandpa in his chair, looking smaller than she remembered, older, more fragile. Her anger melted into grief as she knelt beside him. "Hey, Dad," she said softly. "It's Linda, your daughter from Seattle." Grandpa studied her face, recognition flickering. "Linda, but you're—" "David said you were in Phoenix, said we were going to visit." "David lied," Linda said flatly, "but I'm here now. Really here." The reunion was bittersweet. Grandpa kept confusing timelines, asking Linda about her husband who died 5 years ago, mentioning her kids as if they were still in elementary school rather than grown with families of their own. But he knew her, held her hand, seemed comforted by her presence. Sarah immediately took charge of domestic logistics, sending Grace to rest while she prepared lunch for the legal team. "I took 3 weeks off," she announced. "Someone needs to manage the house while Yolanda fights the legal battles. Division of labor." The prosecutors arrived after lunch. Assistant U.S. Attorney Michelle Torres, leading a team that included FBI agents and a specialist in elder trafficking cases. The federal government was taking this seriously, seeing in Grandpa's case a chance to dismantle a nationwide criminal enterprise. Mr. Sullivan's case is what we call a perfect victim scenario in the best possible way. Torres explained, her voice carefully modulated to avoid upsetting Grandpa. He's sympathetic. His mental state is documented, but not so advanced. He can't testify with accommodations. The evidence is overwhelming, and the crime was stopped before completion. Juries will connect with him. "You want to put him on the stand?" I asked, protective instincts flaring. "He can barely remember what happened yesterday." "With proper support and accommodation, yes. His testimony, even if fragmented, carries enormous weight. The jury needs to see who these criminals target, understand the human cost of elder trafficking." We spent hours reviewing evidence, building timelines, preparing for the legal battles ahead. Throughout it all, Grandpa dozed in his chair or worked on his puzzle, occasionally contributing observations that showed how much he absorbed even when seemingly absent. "That man was here earlier," he said, suddenly pointing at a photo of Dad in the evidence files. "I know him. He wanted my money, but Yolanda stopped him." The simplicity of it, reduced to its essence without elaborate justifications or family complications, made the crime starker. A man wanted money that wasn't his. A granddaughter stopped him. Everything else was just noise. By evening, the legal teams had departed, leaving behind a battle plan that would play out over months. The immediate priority was securing guardianship to protect Grandpa from any further family interference. The criminal trials would follow, with Dad facing federal charges that could result in 20 years imprisonment. 20 years, Linda repeated at dinner, her voice mixing satisfaction and sadness. He'll die in prison. Maybe, I said, feeling nothing at the prospect. He made his choices. I should have been here more, Linda continued, guilt creeping into her voice. Should have visited, checked in, noticed something was wrong. We all should have done things differently, Sarah said pragmatically, but we're here now. That's what matters. Grandpa, eating meatloaf with careful concentration, looked up suddenly. Are we having a party? So many people today. Is it my birthday? Every day with you is worth celebrating, Dad, Linda said, tears threatening. That night, with Sarah and Linda settled in the guest room, I found myself alone with Grandpa as he prepared for bed. The house felt fuller, warmer, with family who'd come to help rather than harm. But the legal documents piled on the dining table reminded me of the battles ahead. Big day tomorrow, Grandpa asked, noticing my distraction. The first of many, sigh, I admitted. We're going to make sure you're safe, that no one can hurt you again. He nodded thoughtfully. I used to protect you, when you were little. Scared of monsters under the bed. I'd check every night, tell you it was all clear. I remember. Now you check for my monsters, he continued with surprising clarity. Except mine wear suits and pretend to love me while stealing everything. Those are scarier than the underbed kind. Yes, I agreed, they are. But you're scarier than them, he said with satisfaction. My granddaughter, the monster fighter. Your grandmother would be proud. He fell asleep, quickly worn out by the day's activities. I sat in his room for a while, listening to him breathe, thinking about the legal machinery now in motion. Tomorrow would bring the emergency guardianship hearing. Next week, the first of many depositions. The months ahead would be consumed by courtrooms and testimony fighting to see justice done. But tonight, Grandpa slept peacefully, protected by family who'd traveled thousands of miles to stand guard. The legal battle would be long and draining, but we'd face it together. The family that had tried to destroy him was gone, replaced by one forged in crisis and strengthened by purpose. The irony wasn't lost on me. Dad had tried to solve his financial problems by exploiting Grandpa's vulnerability. Instead, he'd created a legal nightmare that would consume whatever resources he had left, destroy his reputation, and likely end with him dying in prison. Meanwhile, Grandpa was surrounded by more genuine care than he'd had in years. Sometimes justice looked like handcuffs in courtrooms. Sometimes it looked like a daughter flying across the country to make her father soup a granddaughter, learning elder law to become a better advocate, a cousin managing household logistics so others could fight larger battles. Tomorrow, the legal system would begin grinding through the process of punishment and restitution. But tonight, in this quiet house, love had already won the most important victory. Grandpa was home, he was safe, and he was valued for more than his bank account. The monsters had been exposed and expelled. Now came the longer work of healing and rebuilding, but we do that together. One legal motion, one court date, one small act of care at a time. Grandpa had taught us all to be monster fighters. Now we'd prove worthy of that lesson. Wednesday started like any other day in our new routine. Sarah prepared breakfast, while Linda helped Grandpa with his morning medications. I reviewed legal documents at the dining table, preparing for the afternoon's guardianship hearing. Everything felt manageable, controlled, until Grandpa tried to stand from his chair and couldn't. My leg won't work, he said, confusion mixing with fear as his left side remained unresponsive. Why won't it work? The next moments blurred together. Calling 911, Linda, checking his pupils, Sarah gathering his medications, me holding his right hand as his speech began to slur. The EMTs arrived within minutes, their professional calm a stark contrast to our barely controlled panic. Likely stroke. One confirmed loading Grandpa onto a stretcher. How long since symptoms started? Well, 5 minutes, maybe less, I said, climbing into the ambulance beside him. He was fine at breakfast. The ride to Presbyterian Hospital felt eternal, despite the speed. Grandpa drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally squeezing my hand when prompted. The EMT administered medications radioed ahead to the stroke team, transformed the ambulance into a mobile emergency room, fighting to preserve brain function with every passing second. At the hospital, they whisked him away immediately. The same emergency department where I'd worked as a cardiac nurse now became a waiting room where I sat helpless, roles reversed. Linda and Sarah arrived minutes later, having followed in Sarah's rental car. This is my fault, Linda said, pacing the waiting area. The stress of seeing me, the legal proceedings, everything that's happened. Stress didn't cause this. I interrupted, drawing on my medical knowledge to combat guilt. Grandpa's had hypertension for years. His age, his condition? These are all risk factors. This could have happened any time. Dr. Margaret Chen, the neurologist on call, emerged after what felt like hours, but was probably 40 minutes. He's stable. The CT shows an ischemic stroke, a clot, not a bleed. We've administered TPA within the window. The next 24 hours are critical, but his preliminary responses are encouraging. Can we see him? Sarah asked. Soon. He's being transferred to the neuro ICU. I need to ask, has he been under unusual stress recently? Linda and I exchanged glances. You could say that, I said, then provided a condensed version of the past week's events. Dr. Chen's expression grew increasingly grim. Elder abuse as a stroke trigger isn't uncommon, she said quietly. The psychological trauma, the disruption of routine, the fear, it all contributes to physiological stress. Your father didn't just try to traffic him. He may have literally broken his brain. The words hit like physical blows. Another crime to add to Dad's growing list, though this one couldn't be prosecuted in any court. How did you charge someone with stealing their father's health through betrayal? In the neuro ICU, Grandpa looked small among the monitors and IV lines. His left side showed obvious weakness. His speech when he tried to talk came out garbled, but his eyes tracked our movements and his right hand reached for mine with purposeful intent. Hey, Grandpa, I said softly, taking his hand. You're in the hospital. You had a small stroke, but the doctors are taking good care of you. He tried to respond, frustration clear, when only mumbled sounds emerged. The nurse, recognizing his distress, brought a communication board with simple pictures and, yes, no options. Grandpa pointed to the image of a house, then looked at me questioningly. Yes, you'll go home, I promised. As soon as you're better, we're not going anywhere without you. The hours that followed were a delicate balance of medical care and emotional support. Neurological checks every hour, medications, adjusted physical therapy already being discussed for when he stabilized. Through it all, one of us remained at his bedside, maintaining the anchor of familiar faces in the confusion of critical care. Janet Blackwood arrived that evening, having heard about the stroke from Sarah's text updates. The guardianship hearing was postponed, she said quietly, standing at the foot of Grandpa's bed. The judge wants a current medical assessment of his capacity. This complicates things. How? Linda asked, exhaustion clear in her voice. If Frank can't communicate his wishes clearly, the court might appoint a neutral guardian rather than family. Given the existing abuse situation, they'll be extra cautious about family involvement. The possibility of losing guardianship to a stranger after everything we'd done to protect him felt like another blow. But I understood the court's position. How could they trust a family that had already proven capable of exploitation? We'll cross that bridge when necessary, I said, focusing on the immediate crisis. Right now, he needs to survive and recover. Legal battles can wait. That night, I took the first overnight shift in the ICU. The familiar rhythms of hospital care, the soft beeping of monitors, the whispered conversations at the nurse's station, the periodic checks of vital signs, provided odd comfort. This was a world I understood where problems had protocols and medications had predictable effects. Around 2 a.m., Grandpa woke fully, his eyes clearer than they'd been in hours. He gestured for the communication board, slowly spelling out DAVID. "Dad's in jail," I told him simply. "He can't hurt you anymore." He processed this, then spelled GOOD. The effort exhausted him, but the message was clear. Even stroke-addled, he remembered the betrayal and felt safer knowing his son was locked away. The tragedy of it, a father relieved his son was imprisoned, added another layer to our family's destruction. Dr. Chen arrived from morning rounds with cautiously optimistic news. The follow-up imaging shows the clot dissolved successfully. There's definite damage, but less than we initially feared. With aggressive therapy, he could regain significant function. "How much is significant?" Linda pressed. "He'll likely need assistance walking at least initially. His speech should improve with therapy, though it may never fully return to baseline. The cognitive impact is harder to assess given his pre-existing dementia. But he's fighting. That's what matters now." The mention of fighting drew a weak smile from Grandpa. He'd always been a fighter, in the Navy, in his career, in his battle with Alzheimer's. Now he had another war to wage, this time against his own body's betrayal. Physical therapy started that afternoon, just simple exercises. Squeezing a ball, lifting his left arm with assistants attempting basic words. The therapist, a cheerful woman named Maria, treated him with the perfect blend of encouragement and realistic expectations. "You're doing great, Mr. Sullivan," she said as he managed to wiggle his left fingers slightly. "Every movement is a victory." Between therapy sessions, the legal machinery continued grinding forward. Janet conducted a bedside meeting discussing options for protecting Grandpa's assets while he recovered. The prosecutor called expressing concern about his ability to testify if the stroke impaired his communication significantly. "One crisis at a time," Sarah said firmly, ushering the lawyers out when Grandpa showed signs of agitation. "He's not a case file. He's a person recovering from major medical trauma." The extended family response to news of the stroke varied predictably. Patricia sent flowers with a card expressing genuine sympathy. Marcus texted asking if he could visit, which I ignored. Mom left 3 voicemails I deleted without listening to. And Dad, through his public defender, had the audacity to request a compassionate release to visit his father. "Absolutely not," Janet responded to that request. "The defendant is charged with causing severe emotional and financial harm to the victim. Allowing contact would be re-traumatizing and potentially dangerous." By Friday, Grandpa had improved enough to move from ICU to a regular neurological floor. His speech remained slurred but increasingly understandable. His left side showed gradual improvement, though walking remained impossible without significant support. Most encouraging, his personality began reasserting itself. "Pretty nurse," he mumbled to Maria during therapy, managing a roguish wink with his good eye. "Mr. Sullivan?" She laughed. "Are you flirting with me?" Always," he managed the word clearer than anything he'd said in days. These glimpses of the grandpa we knew fighting through stroke damage to crack jokes and charm his caregivers provided hope. He was still in there wounded, but not defeated. The weekend brought a surprise visitor. Tom from the diner where Grandpa had eaten breakfast for 30 years arrived with a container of soup. "Made his favorite," he said gruffly, clearly uncomfortable in the hospital setting. Figured when he can eat regular food again, he'd want something familiar. "He can have some now," the nurse confirmed, checking his swallowing assessment. "Pureed, but the taste should come through." Watching Grandpa's face light up at the familiar flavor of Tom's chicken noodle soup, seeing the community of people who genuinely cared about him, reinforced why we'd fought so hard to keep him home. These connections, these small kindnesses, these fragments of normal life were what Dad would have stolen along with his money and dignity. Sunday marked 1 week since the stroke. The neurologist's assessment showed measurable improvement. Left side movement, increasing speech clearer, though still effortful cognitive function difficult to separate from his baseline dementia, but not noticeably worse. He'll need intensive rehabilitation, Dr. Chen explained. I recommend transitioning to our inpatient rehab unit for at least 2 weeks, possibly longer. After that, he'll need continued therapy at home. Whatever he needs, I said immediately, then caught myself. Wait, what about insurance? What about costs? That's where having a good legal team helps, Janet interjected. We've already confirmed his Medicare and supplemental insurance will cover the rehab, and we're filing claims against your father's assets for any uncovered expenses. The man who stole from him will end up paying for his recovery. The irony was perfect. Dad's greed had triggered the stroke, but his seized assets would fund Grandpa's rehabilitation. Justice sometimes came in unexpected forms. That evening, as Linda and Sarah prepared to return to Seattle for a few days to handle their own responsibilities, Grandpa managed his longest sentence since the stroke. "Thank you for coming to save me." "Always, Dad." Linda promised, tears flowing freely. "We'll be back next weekend. Yolanda will take good care of you." "I know," he said clearly. "She always does." After they left, I sat with Grandpa as he dozed, processing the week's whiplash journey from legal battles to medical crisis. The stroke had derailed our immediate plans, but hadn't changed the fundamental situation. He still needed protection, still deserved dignity, still required advocates willing to fight for him. Tomorrow he'd move to rehab, beginning the slow work of reclaiming function stolen by stress and stroke. The legal battles would resume, eventually complicated now by his increased vulnerability. The family fractures would continue deepening as consequences played out. But tonight he slept peacefully in a hospital bed, surrounded by cards from diner regulars, flowers from neighbors, and the knowledge that people who truly loved him stood guard. The stroke had taken pieces of his function but hadn't touched his spirit. He was still Grandpa Frank, stubborn, charming, determined to flirt with his therapists and eat contraband soup from his favorite diner. Dad had tried to break him through betrayal. His body had tried to break him through stroke. But Grandpa Frank Sullivan was tougher than all of them, and he had something they hadn't counted on. People willing to fight as hard for him as he'd once fought for us. The battle wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But we'd face it together, one therapy session, one legal motion, one spoonful of pureed soup at a time. Love had won the first round. Now came the longer fight for recovery. 2 weeks into Grandpa's rehabilitation, the FBI investigation exploded into national news. Tuesday morning started with my phone buzzing incessantly as reporters tried to reach the granddaughter who exposed the elderly trafficking ring. By noon, news vans lined the street outside Grandpa's empty house, their cameras hungry for any scrap of human interest to flesh out the larger story. "You need to see this," Sarah said, calling from Seattle where she'd returned to handle work obligations. She texted a link to a CNN report. FBI uncovers nationwide elder trafficking network, hundreds of victims identified. The report detailed how the Casa de Descanso case had revealed a sophisticated operation spanning 12 states. Facilities in Mexico, Guatemala, and Costa Rica had been receiving confused elderly Americans for years, charging families a fraction of U.S. care costs while providing substandard, often fatal conditions. Grandpa's face appeared on screen, a photo from last Christmas when he'd been healthier, more himself. The investigation began when Yolanda Sullivan prevented her grandfather's trafficking at Denver International Airport. The reporter explained, "What seemed like a family dispute has exposed an international criminal enterprise preying on America's most vulnerable." At the rehab facility, I found Grandpa working with his speech therapist, slowly forming words with intense concentration. He'd made remarkable progress. His left side had regained significant function. though he still needed a walker, and his speech, while slow, was mostly intelligible. "Big story," he said, pointing at the TV in the common room where his photo had just appeared again. "That's me." "You're famous, Mr. Sullivan," his therapist said cheerfully. "A hero for stopping bad people." "Not hero," he corrected carefully. "Yolanda. Hero, I just got lost." The modesty was typical Grandpa, but the FBI saw it differently. Special Agent Patricia Williams arrived that afternoon with a team of investigators specifically trained in interviewing elderly victims with cognitive impairment. "Mr. Sullivan's testimony is crucial," she explained during our pre-interview meeting. "He's one of the few victims who was rescued before reaching the facilities. Most families don't report their relatives missing for months, if ever. By then, the victims often can't communicate what happened." They'd set up a comfortable interview space in the rehab facility's family lounge, complete with recording equipment, modified for Grandpa's speaking limitations. Linda had flown back to be present, along with victim advocate Caroline Reeves and Grandpa's newly appointed speech therapist to help interpret if needed. "Frank," Agent Williams began gently, "we need to ask you about the people who tried to take you to Mexico. Is that okay?" Grandpa nodded, his good hand gripping mine. "Bad people. Liars." Over the next 2 hours, with frequent breaks, Grandpa provided more coherent testimony than anyone had expected. The stroke hadn't touched his long-term memory, and his recall of the airport incident remained surprisingly clear. He identified both women from photo arrays, described their tactics, and most powerfully communicated the fear he'd felt. "Knew something wrong," he said, each word careful and deliberate. "They rushed. Wouldn't let me think. Like wolves." "Wolves?" Agent Williams prompted gently. "Circling, waiting to separate me from herd." He looked at me. "But Yolanda came back. Wolves. Ran away." The imagery was powerful and accurate. The investigation had revealed Casa de Descanso's predatory tactics, identifying vulnerable elderly people through hospital discharge planners, social media, even church bulletins advertising affordable care solutions. They specifically targeted families in financial crisis, offering what seemed like salvation but delivered neglect and exploitation. "Your grandfather's case has given us something invaluable," Agent Williams told us afterward, "a victim who can testify, family members willing to provide evidence and documentation of the entire conspiracy. We've already made 37 arrests across 4 states." But the investigation had also revealed something that made my blood run cold. Among the seized documents from Casa de Descanso's U.S. offices were lists of potential clients, elderly people whose families had made initial inquiries but hadn't yet committed. Grandpa's name appeared on lists dating back 8 months long before that family dinner, where Dad first mentioned care facilities. 8 months, I repeated, staring at the evidence. He'd been planning this for 8 months. The financial theft aligns with that timeline. Robert Chen confirmed cross-referencing bank records. The first unauthorized transfers began shortly after his initial contact with the facility. He was funding the plan by stealing from its intended victim. The depth of premeditation was staggering. Every family gathering, every concerned visit, every offer to help with Dad's finances had been part of a calculated scheme. Dad hadn't snapped under pressure. He'd executed a carefully planned crime. Wednesday brought another shocking revelation. Marcus, facing his own legal troubles, had agreed to cooperate fully with investigators. His recorded testimony, played during a meeting with prosecutors, revealed the full scope of family involvement. Dad presented it like a business proposal, Marcus's voice said through the speakers. He had spreadsheets showing the cost savings projections of Grandpa's remaining life expectancy calculations, of inheritance after care costs. He made it seem logical, inevitable, said Grandpa would get decent care and we'd preserve the family assets. When did you realize it was wrong? The prosecutor asked on the recording. I always knew, Marcus admitted, but I told myself it was like putting a dog to sleep when they're suffering. Merciful. Patricia kept saying we should research the facility ourselves, but Dad said he'd handled everything. I chose to believe him because it was easier. The comparison to euthanizing an animal made me physically ill. Linda left the room unable to listen further, but I forced myself to hear every word to understand the full horror of what they'd planned. The investigation revealed Casa de Descanso's conditions through testimonies from former employees who'd fled in horror. Elderly Americans housed 6 to a room in a converted motel, meals consisting of rice and beans with occasional protein, medications administered incorrectly or not at all, bedridden patients developing pressure sores that went untreated. The 90-day no-visit policy wasn't for adjustment. It was to ensure families couldn't see the deterioration until it was too late. The mortality rate was 60% within 6 months, Agent Williams reported grimly. They counted on it. Collected fees from desperate families, provided minimal care, and waited for nature to take its course. Then they'd send a form letter about the patient's peaceful passing and cremate the remains to avoid autopsy questions. Grandpa listened to some of these revelations during a group meeting at the rehab facility. His face showed no surprise, only deep sadness. Thrown away, he said clearly, like garbage, old garbage. Never, I said firmly. You're treasured, valued, loved. By you, he agreed. But how many others? How many thrown away? It was a question that haunted everyone involved in the investigation. For every family member like me who'd fought back, how many had gone along with the abandonment? How many elderly people were suffering in substandard facilities right now, forgotten by families who'd chosen finances over humanity? The media attention intensified as more details emerged. Dateline NBC wanted to film a segment at the rehab facility. 60 Minutes requested interviews. Publishers contacted me about book deals, the story of the granddaughter who saved her grandfather and exposed a trafficking ring had captured national attention. No, was my response to all of it. Grandpa's recovery comes first. The investigation comes second. Everything else can wait. But some media attention proved helpful. A GoFundMe started by strangers had raised over $100,000 for Grandpa's ongoing care. Messages poured in from families who'd been scammed by similar operations, thanking us for exposing the truth. Elder rights organizations offered support and resources. More importantly, the attention sparked policy discussions. Colorado's governor announced an emergency task force on elder trafficking. Federal legislation was being drafted to close the loopholes that allowed these operations to flourish. Grandpa's near tragedy might prevent countless others. Friday afternoon brought an unexpected visitor to the rehab facility. Detective Santos arrived with news that made even hardened investigators emotional. We found her, she said, simply showing us a photograph of an elderly woman. Maria Gonzalez, not the Casa de Descanso employee, but a victim from Denver who disappeared 3 months ago. Her family thought she died. She's alive in the Guadalajara facility. Maria's story was heartbreakingly familiar. Family struggling financially, promised affordable care, elderly relative disappearing into a facility that stonewalled all inquiries. But the investigation had given Mexican authorities the leverage needed to raid the facilities and repatriate victims. She's coming home, Santos continued. Along with 17 other Americans we've identified so far, they're all coming home. Grandpa studied the photograph with intense focus. Bring them all home, he said firmly. Every one. That became a rallying cry for the investigation. Journalists picked up the phrase. Families of missing elderly relatives adopted it. The personal cost of this transformation wasn't lost on me. Dad's public defender had stopped requesting compassionate releases, recognizing the futility as evidence mounted. He now faced federal racketeering charges in addition to state crimes. Mom had retreated entirely, her lawyer handling all communication. Marcus lived under house arrest awaiting trial, while Patricia proceeded with divorce. The family that had gathered for Sunday dinners was now connected only through legal proceedings. But a different family had emerged. Tom from the diner visited weekly, bringing soup and gossip from the neighborhood. Grandpa's former co-workers from the railroad organized a visiting schedule. Church members he hadn't seen in years reappeared with casseroles and companionship. The community Dad had tried to steal from Grandpa had instead rallied around him. "Real family," Grandpa observed during a particularly crowded visiting hour, "chose me, not money." The investigation would continue for months, maybe years. Trials would follow, sentences would be handed down, and policies would slowly change. The full scope of the elder trafficking network might never be completely known. But in that rehab facility room, surrounded by people who'd chosen love over convenience, Grandpa had already won the only victory that truly mattered. He was seen. He was valued. He was home even in an institutional setting because home was where people fought for your dignity. The investigation had revealed humanity's capacity for cruelty, but our response had revealed something stronger, the fierce love that refuses to let the vulnerable be thrown away. "Thank you," Grandpa said that evening as I helped him prepare for bed, "for seeing me." "Always," I promised. "Even when everything else gets blurry, I'll always see you." He smiled, the expression slightly lopsided from stroke damage, but genuine. Tomorrow would bring more therapy, more legal proceedings, more revelations about the network we'd helped expose. But tonight, Grandpa Frank Sullivan rested knowing he'd sparked a movement, saved lives, and proven that one family's courage could illuminate the darkness where predators hunt. The investigation had deepened beyond anything we'd imagined, but so had our resolve to see it through, to bring them all home, to ensure no grandfather ever again became just another entry in a trafficker's spreadsheet. The wolves had been exposed. Now came the long work of building better fences. The third week of Grandpa's rehabilitation brought an unexpected transformation. What had begun as a family crisis had evolved into something larger, and on a rainy Thursday morning, the true scope of that change became clear. "Mr. Sullivan has visitors," the receptionist announced, seeming puzzled. "Quite a few visitors." In the rehabilitation center's main lounge, I found 23 members of Grandpa's American Legion post, all in their dress uniforms, despite most being in their 70s and 80s. They'd driven down from across Colorado, some traveling hours, to present Grandpa with something that would change everything. Car Frank Sullivan, the post commander, Harold Martinez, announced formally, "Your brothers in arms have not forgotten you." He produced a check that made me gasp. $73,000 raised from veterans across 5 states who heard your story. No veteran should face what you faced. Not on our watch. Grandpa, standing with his walker for the presentation, straightened as much as his stroke-affected body allowed. His eyes, often clouded by confusion, sharpened with military precision. "Sir," he managed clearly, attempting a salute with his good hand. "At ease, sailor," Harold said gently, helping Grandpa back to his chair. "We take care of our own. Always have, always will." The presentation was just the beginning. Harold explained that the American Legion had established the Frank Sullivan Fund to help veterans facing elder abuse or abandonment. They'd also connected with the VA to ensure Grandpa received every benefit he'd earned, but never claimed out of stubborn self-reliance. "You served on the USS Coral Sea, correct?" Harold asked, consulting a folder. "During the Cuban Missile Crisis, that qualifies you for additional compensation you've never received. We're fixing that." The bureaucratic maze that might have taken years to navigate alone was being cleared by veterans who understood both the system and the principle of leaving no one behind. Within hours, they'd scheduled appointments, filed paperwork, and assigned volunteers to ensure Grandpa received everything he'd earned through service decades ago. But the community response extended far beyond military connections. That afternoon, a delegation from Grandpa's old church arrived with news that made him cry, the good kind of tears that had been too rare lately. "We've been praying for you, Frank," Pastor Rebecca Chen said, taking his hands in hers. "And God answered with an idea. The church is establishing a respite program for caregivers of elderly relatives. We're calling it Frank's Friends in your honor." The program would provide trained volunteers to stay with elderly family members, giving caregivers breaks to handle errands work or simply rest. It addressed one of the core issues that led to families considering drastic measures: the overwhelming burden of constant care without support. No one should choose between their loved one's safety and their own survival. Pastor Chen continued, "Your story woke us up to how many suffer in silence. We're changing that." Grandpa listened with growing amazement as visitor after visitor explained how his near tragedy had sparked action. The local Rotary Club had started a fund to help families afford quality home care. The Senior Center had launched a program connecting isolated elderly people with daily check-in calls. The library had begun a service delivering books to homebound seniors, combating the cognitive decline that comes with isolation. "All this for me?" Grandpa asked, overwhelmed. "Because of you," I corrected. "Your story showed people what could happen to any of us. They're making sure it doesn't happen to others." The media attention, which I'd initially resisted, had proven invaluable in rallying support. A Denver Post follow-up article about Grandpa's recovery had prompted an avalanche of donations and volunteers, but more importantly, it had sparked conversations in families across Colorado about elder care advance directives and protecting vulnerable relatives from exploitation. Friday brought corporate involvement. A representative from a major healthcare company arrived with an announcement that reflected how far the ripples had spread. "We've been following Mr. Sullivan's case," she explained. "It highlighted gaps in our discharge planning process. We're implementing new protocols to ensure elderly patients aren't released to potentially exploitative situations. We're calling it the Sullivan Standard." The protocol would require additional verification for any elderly patient being discharged to facilities outside standard networks, especially international ones. Social workers would be trained to recognize signs of financial exploitation. Patients would be interviewed privately about their understanding of care arrangements. "Are we one person's near tragedy preventing countless others?" the representative said. "That's Mr. Sullivan's legacy." "Still alive," Grandpa protested mildly. "No legacy yet." Everyone laughed, but the point stood. Grandpa wasn't just a victim or a cautionary tale. He was a living catalyst for change, and the community was ensuring his impact extended far beyond our family drama. Saturday's mail brought evidence of how widely the story had resonated. Letters arrived from across the country, some containing small donations, others sharing similar stories of elder abuse prevented or addressed because our situation had given them courage to act. One letter particularly moved, Grandpa read aloud by Linda during her weekend visit. "Dear Mr. Sullivan, I'm writing to thank you. My family was considering sending my mother to a affordable facility in Mexico. Your story made us research further. The place was connected to the same network that tried to traffic you. Instead, we found resources in our community we didn't know existed. Mom is still home, still safe because of you. God bless you. The Rodriguez family, Albuquerque." "Saved someone," Grandpa said wonderingly. "Maybe worth it?" "You saved many someones," Linda assured him, "and you're worth everything regardless." The weekend culminated in something that would have been impossible to imagine weeks ago. The Rehabilitation Center hosted at the community meeting about elder care resources, and over 200 people attended. Families seeking guidance, professionals offering services, volunteers wanting to help, all drawn by Grandpa's story and the movement it had sparked. I watched from the back as various speakers shared resources and stories. Grace, Grandpa's home health aide, had been recruited to train other caregivers in compassionate dementia care. Tom from the diner announced a new program providing free meals to homebound seniors. Even Marcus's estranged wife, Patricia, spoke, sharing her perspective as someone who'd almost participated in elder abandonment and now advocated against it. "The pressure families face is real," Patricia said, her voice steady despite visible nerves. "Financial strain, caregiver, burnout, lack of resources. These are genuine challenges, but abandoning our elderly is never the answer. I almost became complicit in something monstrous because I didn't speak up. Don't make my mistake." Grandpa, seated in the front row in his wheelchair, bad days still required it, listened with fierce attention. When the formal program ended, people lined up to shake his hand, thank him, share their own stories. He greeted each person with the dignity of someone holding court even when confusion clouded his responses. "Don't forget," he said to each person, the phrase becoming his rallying cry, "don't forget us." The community response had practical impacts beyond emotional support. Legal aid organizations offered pro bono assistance for the ongoing trials. Financial advisors volunteered to help families protect elderly relatives' assets legitimately. Medical professionals provided free consultations about care options. Most powerfully, families who'd lost relatives to the Casa de Descanso network found comfort in collective action. A support group formed, meeting weekly to share grief and advocate for justice. They adopted Grandpa as their symbolic survivor, the one who got away, representing all those who hadn't. Sunday evening, as the weekend's activities wound down, I found Grandpa on the rehabilitation center's small patio, watching the sunset paint the mountains purple, the same mountains he'd feared never seeing again. "Big week," I observed, sitting beside him. "Different world," he replied slowly. "When I was young, elderly just disappeared. Now, people fight for us." "As young, some always fought," I reminded him, "but now more people understand why it matters." He nodded, then added something that captured the profound shift his case had triggered. "Not about me anymore, about all of us, all the throwaway people." The term hit hard. Throwaway people. Those deemed too expensive, too difficult, too inconvenient. But the community had risen up to declare that no one was throwaway, that every person retained worth regardless of age, confusion, or cost. As we went inside for dinner, Grandpa moving slowly but determinedly with his walker, the news played on the common room television. Another arrest in the elder trafficking case. Another facility raided. Another group of elderly Americans coming home. The movement he'd sparked continued growing, reaching into corners of exploitation that had thrived in shadow and silence. "Started something," Grandpa observed with satisfaction. "You started everything," I agreed, "by being worth fighting for, by having people who refused to let you disappear." The rehabilitation center, once just a medical facility, had become a hub of advocacy and action. Social workers reported a dramatic increase in families seeking legitimate care resources rather than considering questionable alternatives. The threat of becoming another Casa de Descanso case had become a powerful deterrent to would-be exploiters. But beyond policy changes and programs, the most profound impact was personal. Families were having difficult conversations about care preferences before crisis hit. Adult children were checking on elderly parents more frequently. Communities were recognizing isolation as a risk factor and responding with connection. That night, as I helped Grandpa prepare for bed, he seemed more at peace than he had since before the stroke. The man who'd feared being forgotten had instead become unforgettable, his story woven into the fabric of a movement that would outlast all of us. "Thank you," he said clearly, gripping my hand, for not letting them win. "Thank you," I responded, "for being worth the fight." He smiled that slightly crooked post-stroke smile that had become precious in its imperfection. Tomorrow would bring more therapy, more legal proceedings, more challenges as his conditions progressed. But it would also bring a community that had proven throwing people away was not acceptable, not normal, and definitely not inevitable. The rally had become a revolution, one conversation, one family, one saved life at a time. And at its center sat an elderly Navy veteran with Alzheimer's and stroke damage who'd somehow sparked a nationwide awakening about the value of those society too often forgets. Grandpa had wanted to see the Grand Canyon on that fabricated trip to Phoenix. Instead, he'd become a bridge across a different kind of chasm, the one between isolated families and community support, between desperation and resources, between viewing the elderly as burdens and recognizing them as treasures. The community had rallied. Now came the sustained work of ensuring the momentum became lasting change. But watching Grandpa sleep peacefully, knowing hundreds of people stood ready to ensure his dignity, I felt something I hadn't experienced since that horrible morning at the airport. Hope. Not just hope for Grandpa, but for all the throwaway people who might now be caught before they fell. The community had proven that we're only as strong as how we treat our most vulnerable. And finally, we were choosing strength. 6 months had passed since that terrible morning at Denver International Airport. The December air carried the bite of coming snow as I wheeled Grandpa through the doors of Mountain View Memory Care Center, not as an abandoned victim, but as an honored resident, choosing his next chapter on his own terms. "So, welcome home, Mr. Sullivan." The director, Dr. James Patterson, greeted us warmly. Unlike Casa de Descanso's predatory recruitment, Mountain View had been thoroughly vetted, visited multiple times, and selected by Grandpa himself during his clearer moments. "Nice place," Grandpa observed, taking in the bright common areas, the mountain views from every window, the small groups of residents engaged in various activities. "Smells good." It did smell good. Like fresh coffee and baking bread, not the institutional disinfectant we'd feared. The facility had opened their books, welcomed family involvement, and encouraged us to speak with current residents and their families. Everything Casa de Descanso hadn't been. The decision to transition into memory care had been Grandpa's made during one of his increasingly rare, fully lucid periods. "Can't keep you from living," he told me firmly. "Your job, your life matter too." The months of rehabilitation had restored significant function. He walked with a cane, now his speech largely recovered, though still slow when tired. But the combination of Alzheimer's and stroke damage had progressed to where 24-hour supervision was necessary. Grace had been wonderful, but even with additional help, keeping Grandpa safely at home while I worked had become unsustainable. "Your room's ready," Dr. Patterson said, leading us down a hallway decorated with vintage photographs of Colorado landmarks. "Your family sent some items ahead to make it feel like home." The room took my breath away. Linda and Sarah had worked with the staff to recreate elements of Grandpa's house. His favorite recliner sat by the window. His Navy photos hung on the walls. His grandmother's quilt covered the bed. Even his coffee maker, the one luxury he'd insisted on, sat on a small table. "My one chair," Grandpa said with delight, immediately settling into it. "And look, mountains." The view faced west toward the Rockies, the same mountains he'd watched from his porch for decades. As if choreographed, the American Legion had arranged for their color guard to march past the window, presenting arms in salute to their brother. Grandpa straightened, returning the salute with tears streaming down his face. "They didn't forget," he whispered. "No one's forgetting you," I assured him. "Ever." The transition to Mountain View represented more than just a change of address. It marked the successful conclusion of legal battles that had consumed the past months. Dad had been sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, with additional state charges keeping him locked up potentially for life. His reaction to the verdict, cursing me mom, the judge, everyone but himself, had eliminated any lingering doubts about our estrangement. Mom had received 5 years probation and mandatory community service with elder organizations. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. She'd spent years serving the population she'd helped target. She'd attempted contact through letters expressing remorse, but I wasn't ready for reconciliation. Maybe someday, not yet. Marcus had pled down to 2 years minimum security, largely due to his cooperation and Patricia's evidence. Their divorce had finalized last month. Patricia and their daughter lived with her parents, now slowly rebuilding. She sent photos occasionally, Lily taking her first steps, celebrating her first birthday, life continuing despite the wreckage. But the legal victories paled beside the personal triumph of Grandpa's recovery and the systemic changes his case had sparked. The Frank Sullivan Fund had helped dozens of veterans access quality care. The Sullivan Standard had prevented countless dubious discharges. The elder trafficking network had been largely dismantled with over 200 victims returned to American soil. "You're a hero," I told Grandpa as we unpacked his belongings. "No," he corrected with surprising firmness. "You hero. I'm just old man who got lucky." A knock interrupted our debate. Tom from the diner entered with a covered dish. "Brought your favorite soup," he announced. "Already cleared it with the kitchen here. They'll keep me supplied with ingredients so I can make it fresh every week." The gesture represented everything right about Mountain View. They understood that institutional care didn't mean institutional isolation. Grandpa's community could continue visiting, participating, mattering. The facility encouraged it, recognizing that connection was medicine as vital as any pill. Over the following days, we established new routines. I visited every morning before work, sharing coffee and conversation. Linda flew in monthly for long weekends. Sarah video called twice weekly. The American Legion scheduled regular visits. Tom delivered soup. Pastor Chen held services. Grace, hired by Mountain View at Grandpa's request, continued as his primary aide. The continuity of care and community made all the difference. Instead of the isolation and confusion that marked so many memory care transitions, Grandpa thrived in the structured environment with familiar faces. His decline continued. Alzheimer's is relentless, but it proceeded with dignity, surrounded by chosen family. Mountain View also provided something we couldn't at home: specialized programs for memory care residents. Music therapy unlocked memories words couldn't reach. Art classes let him express himself when language failed. Most importantly, he found peers experiencing similar journeys, forming friendships that didn't require remembering names or maintaining complex conversations. "My crew," he'd say, gesturing at his tablemates during meals. They'd all nod, understanding belonging mattered more than specifics. The financial aspect, once insurmountable, had resolved through unexpected channels. The American Legion benefits, the recovered stolen funds, the community donations, and insurance properly applied meant Grandpa could afford quality care indefinitely. The money Dad had killed their family to steal now funded the life Grandpa deserved. 3 months into his residency, Mountain View hosted a celebration of life ceremony for Grandpa. Not a memorial, he was very much alive, but a recognition of impact. Representatives from organizations his case had spawned attended. Families shared stories of elderly relatives saved from trafficking. Officials presented proclamations honoring his inadvertent activism. All this from getting lost at airport?" Grandpa asked, genuinely puzzled by the fuss. "All this from refusing to be thrown away," I corrected. He considered that, then smiled his crooked smile. "Good thing, I'm stubborn." The ceremony's highlight came when the Colorado Attorney General announced the Frank Sullivan Act had passed the legislature. The law created strict penalties for elder trafficking, mandated verification processes for international care facilities, and funded programs supporting home-based care alternatives. Grandpa's name would protect vulnerable elderly people for generations. Big name for little law, Grandpa joked, but his pride was evident. As spring arrived, Grandpa's condition necessitated moving to Mountain View's enhanced care wing. The transition was smooth. Same caregivers, same routines, just additional support as his needs increased. He no longer always recognized me, sometimes calling me by my mother's name or introducing me as the nice lady who visits. But he always knew I was safe, someone who brought comfort even when context escaped. "Love you," he'd say clearly, regardless of what name he used. Love transcended the tangles of his dying neurons. During what would be our last fully coherent conversation, Grandpa gripped my hand with surprising strength. "Was it worth it?" he asked. "All the trouble, the family, broken—" "You're worth everything," I said firmly. "The family broke itself through greed. You just revealed what was already rotten." He nodded slowly. "Promise me something. Anything. When I can't fight anymore, when I'm really lost, don't let them keep me here, suffering. Let me go find Martha." "I promise," I whispered, understanding. "When it's time, I'll let you go." "Good girl. Best granddaughter. Tell others story. Keep fighting for throwaway people." Those became his last fully clear words to me. The disease accelerated after that, stealing speech mobility recognition. But Mountain View kept him comfortable, dignified, surrounded by people who saw him as more than a fading mind in a failing body. The call came on a Tuesday morning in September, 13 months after the airport incident. Grandpa had passed peacefully in his sleep, Grace holding his hand, morning sun painting the mountains gold through his window. He'd finished his journey on his own terms in a place of his choosing, surrounded by love. The funeral reflected the life he'd lived and the impact he'd made. Hundreds attended. Veterans' families saved from trafficking, community members who'd rallied to support him. The media covered it as a conclusion to a story that had captivated the nation. But for me, it was simply goodbye to the man who taught me that love meant fighting for someone's dignity, especially when they couldn't fight themselves. Dad wasn't permitted to attend from prison. Mom came sitting in the back, leaving without speaking to anyone. Marcus sent flowers with a note. "I'm sorry. He deserved better from all of us." Patricia brought Lily, now talking, who placed a dandelion on Grandpa's casket with toddler solemnity. But the presence that mattered most was the hundreds of elderly people still safe in their homes, still valued by their communities, because one confused grandfather at an airport had sparked a movement. As the American Legion's rifle squad fired their salute and the bugler played taps, I knew Grandpa's war was won. The throwaway people had refused to be thrown away, and somewhere I hoped Grandpa had found Martha young and laughing like in their wedding photos, waiting to hear about his final adventure. "Tell her I was brave," he'd said once about reuniting with Grandma. "You were the bravest," I whispered to the Colorado sky as they lowered his flag-draped casket. "And you taught us all to be brave too." The turning point had come not in courtrooms or legislation, but in that moment at the airport when someone decided a confused elderly man was worth more than convenience or money. Every life saved, since every family who chose care over abandonment, every community that rallied around its vulnerable, they all traced back to that moment when love chose to fight. Grandpa was gone. But the movement he'd sparked, the standards he'd set, the love he'd inspired, those would keep fighting long after the last of us, who'd known him personally, had joined him in whatever comes next. Some legacies are built deliberately over lifetimes. Others are forged in crisis when ordinary people make extraordinary choices. Grandpa's legacy was both and neither. A lifetime of quiet decency that prepared one granddaughter to make one crucial choice that changed everything. He'd have been embarrassed by the fuss insisting he'd done nothing special. But that was always Grandpa's way, doing extraordinary things while insisting he was perfectly ordinary. In the end, maybe that was the most important lesson. We're all capable of sparking change. We just have to refuse to throw people away, starting with ourselves. The war against elder abandonment would continue. New predators would emerge, new schemes would target the vulnerable. But now there were warriors ready, trained by an old sailor who'd fought his final battle not with weapons, but with the simple insistence that he mattered. He did matter. They all did. And we'd keep proving it one protected life at a time. 1 year after Grandpa's passing, I stood in the Colorado State Capitol building watching Governor Patricia Hughes sign Executive Order 2027-15 establishing the Office of Elder Protection Services. The pen she used had belonged to Grandpa, his old fountain pen that he'd used to write letters to Grandma during his Navy service. This office, Governor Hughes announced to the assembled crowd, will ensure that what happened to Frank Sullivan and hundreds of others never happens again in Colorado. We're creating a coordinated response system for elder abuse with mandatory reporting, rapid intervention protocols, and support services for families. The journey from that panicked morning at DIA to this moment of institutional change felt surreal. Around me stood the coalition. Grandpa's case had built Linda and Sarah representing our family, Harold Martinez from the American Legion, Pastor Chen and the Interfaith Council, Patricia, now an advocate for elder rights, even Tom from the diner wearing his best suit for the occasion. The executive order was just the latest in a cascade of changes. The Frank Sullivan Act had been adopted by 12 states with federal legislation pending. The Casa de Descanso prosecutions had resulted in over 100 convictions and the complete dismantling of the trafficking network. Most importantly, cultural conversations about elder care had shifted from whispered family shame to public policy priority. After the signing ceremony, we gathered at the new Frank Sullivan Center for Elder Advocacy, built with donations from across the country. The center occupied a renovated Victorian house in Denver's Capitol Hill neighborhood, its wraparound porch reminiscent of Grandpa's beloved home. Inside, social workers, legal advocates, and counselors provided free services to families navigating elder care challenges. He would have hated having his name on a building, Linda said, touching the brass plaque by the entrance. I agreed, but he would have loved what happens inside. The center's first floor housed a resource library and meeting rooms where families could learn about care options, financial planning, and legal protections. The second floor provided office space for advocates who helped families in crisis. The basement had been converted into a respite area where caregivers could bring elderly relatives for supervised activities while handling errands or simply resting. Margaret Chen, the neurologist who treated Grandpa's stroke, had become the center's medical director, ensuring families received accurate information about dementia, stroke recovery, and end-of-life planning. "Your grandfather's case haunted me," she admitted during the opening reception. "How many warning signs I must have missed in other patients. Never again." The ripple effects extended far beyond Colorado. I received weekly emails from families whose elderly relatives had been saved from trafficking schemes. Support groups for families of Casa de Descanso victims had formed nationwide. Universities had added elder trafficking to their social work and criminal justice curricula. What had started as one family's crisis had become a movement reshaping how America cared for its elderly. But the most profound changes were personal. Mom, nearing the end of her probation, had become a different person through her mandatory service at a memory care facility. She'd written me a letter I kept, but hadn't answered. "Yolanda, I spend every day with people like Dad. I see their fear, their confusion, their desperate need for dignity. I understand now what we almost stole from him. I can't undo it, but I'm trying to balance the scales. Yesterday, I helped reunite a resident with his son after months of estrangement. Small redemption, but redemption nonetheless. I don't ask for forgiveness. I ask only that you know I finally understand the monstrosity of what we planned. Love, Mom. Marcus had served 18 months of his sentence release early for good behavior and continued cooperation with authorities. He'd lost his business, his family, his reputation. The last I'd heard, he was working construction and attending therapy. Patricia had full custody of Lily and had returned to school studying social work with a focus on elder advocacy. Their daughter would grow up understanding that family meant protection, not profit. Dad remained in federal prison, unrepentant to the last. He'd filed appeals claiming elder abuse by his victim, insisting Grandpa had promised him the money, painting himself as a devoted son betrayed by a greedy daughter. The courts had been unmoved. He'd serve at least 10 more years, possibly dying behind bars. I felt nothing about that possibility. Not satisfaction, not sorrow, just empty acknowledgement of consequences earned. The Frank Sullivan Center's grand opening featured speakers from across the spectrum of elder care. But the most powerful moment came from an unexpected source. Maria Gonzalez, the elderly woman rescued from Casa de Descanso, who'd been the first successful repatriation, took the podium with the help of her granddaughter. "I was dead," she said in accented but clear English. "My family thought I was dead. I thought I would die in that place. But Frank Sullivan and his granddaughter, they broke down the walls. They brought us home." She looked directly at me. "Your grandfather saved my life. He never knew me, but he saved me anyway. Hero." The word Grandpa had always rejected for himself had become his truth in death, not through intention but through the simple act of being valued by someone who refused to let him disappear. As evening approached and the reception wound down, I found myself alone on the center's porch watching the sun set behind the mountains Grandpa had loved, the same mountains he'd feared never seeing again that had witnessed his final months at Mountain View, that stood eternal while human dramas played out in their shadow. "You did it, Grandpa," I whispered to the purple sky. "You changed everything." A hand touched my shoulder. Linda holding 2 cups of coffee from Tom's diner. He'd set up a small booth inside to serve Grandpa's favorite blend to visitors. "He'd be proud," she said simply. "He'd be embarrassed by the fuss," I corrected. "Then he'd tour every room, meet every person, make sure they had what they needed. Probably flirt with the social workers." We laughed the sound, mixing tears and joy. The Frank Sullivan who'd sat confused and frightened at that airport table had become a symbol of elder dignity nationwide. But to us, he remained simply Grandpa. Stubborn, charming, devoted to family even when family failed him. The center's lights came on as darkness fell, illuminating the wraparound porch where rocking chairs waited for elderly visitors and their families. Tomorrow, those chairs would fill with people seeking help, finding resources, discovering they weren't alone in their struggles. Grandpa's chair at home had been empty for a year, but his spirit filled countless chairs across the country where elderly people sat valued and protected. Sarah joined us on the porch along with Patricia, Tom, Harold, and others who'd become family through crisis. We stood in comfortable silence watching the city lights twinkle below, each lost in memories of the man who'd united us. "What now?" Sarah asked eventually. It was a fair question. The crisis had passed, the trials concluded, the systems reformed. We could return to our separate lives connected only by shared history, but that felt like another abandonment, a different kind of forgetting. "Now we keep fighting," I said. "Every day someone faces what we faced. Every day someone's deciding whether their elderly relative is a burden or a blessing. We make sure they have support to choose blessing." "The Frank Sullivan Center needs volunteers," Patricia added. "I'm starting a support group for family members of trafficking victims. Linda's working on federal legislation. Sarah's creating a documentary. We all have roles." Tom, practical as always, cut to the heart of it. Frank brought us together. Shame to waste that gift by drifting apart now. So we made a pact there on the porch, this unlikely family forged in crisis. We'd meet monthly, supporting each other and the center's work. We'd share holidays, mixing biological and chosen family. We'd ensure Grandpa's legacy lived not just in laws and buildings, but in relationships that proved family meant more than blood or convenience. As we prepared to leave, each heading to our respective homes, Harold Martinez made one final announcement. The American Legion is establishing an annual Frank Sullivan Award for citizens who protect vulnerable veterans. First recipient will be announced on the anniversary of his rescue from the airport. More recognition. Grandpa would have deflected more proof that his unwitting activism continued inspiring others. The throwaway people had found their champion in a confused Navy veteran who just wanted to see his daughter in Phoenix. I was the last to leave, taking a final walk through the center that bore his name. In what would become the respite room, someone had already hung a photo from Grandpa's Navy days. Young and confident in his uniform, ready to serve his country, he'd served again in his final years this time, protecting his fellow elderly from predation and abandonment. The drive home took me past Mountain View, where Grandpa had spent his last months. The facility glowed warmly in the darkness, residents visible through windows engaged in evening activities. Some confused, like Grandpa had been, some clear, all cared for with the dignity every human deserved, the standard Grandpa had set through his suffering. My apartment felt quiet after the day's celebrations, but on my mantel sat Grandpa's coffee mug, the one that said, "World's Best Grandpa," that I'd given him when I was 7. He'd used it every morning until the end, even when he couldn't remember who'd given it to him. Now it held flowers from his grave, renewed weekly, a small shrine to persistent love. The legal battles were won, the systems had changed, the predators were imprisoned or scattered, but the real resolution was simpler and more profound. We'd proven that every person mattered until their last breath. That confusion didn't diminish worth. That vulnerability demanded protection, not exploitation. Grandpa had worried about being forgotten, about disappearing into the fog of Alzheimer's without legacy or impact. Instead, he'd become unforgettable, his name synonymous with elder dignity, his story a cautionary tale and inspiration combined. He'd changed laws, saved lives, and built a family of warriors against elder abandonment. Not bad for a man who just wanted to people watch at the airport while his family checked in for a flight to Phoenix. I prepared for bed, following routines Grandpa had taught me as a child. Check the locks, turn off the lights, say prayers for those we love, but I added one he hadn't taught, born from our journey together. Watch over the throwaway people, give them someone who sees their worth, let them know they matter. And thank you for letting me be that person for Grandpa, even when it cost everything else. The prayer felt right, combining gratitude and ongoing commitment. Tomorrow would bring new challenges at the hospital, where I'd return to nursing with specialized training in elder care. The Frank Sullivan Center would open its doors to families in crisis. Advocates would fight for stronger protections. The work continued. But tonight, resolution meant something simpler. It meant knowing Grandpa had died surrounded by love instead of abandoned in a foreign facility. It meant Dad's greed had birthed its opposite, a movement of generosity and protection. It meant family had been redefined by choice rather than chance. Most of all, it meant the terrified, elderly man at that airport table had won, not just his freedom, but dignity for countless others. Not just justice, but systemic change. Not just survival, but transformation of how we value our elderly. "Don't forget us," Grandpa had pleaded. We wouldn't, we couldn't. The throwaway people had become the remembered ones, and Frank Sullivan had shown us why they always should have been. That was a resolution enough for any story, and legacy enough for any life. The rest was just keeping the promise, one protected elder at a time. 5 years had passed since that morning at Denver International Airport when I watched my father attempt to abandon Grandpa. Now I stood in the same terminal, but everything had changed. Where confused elderly passengers once risked predation train, Elder protection officers now patrolled watching for signs of trafficking or abandonment. Where families once made desperate choices in isolation, resource kiosks offered information about legitimate care options. Where Grandpa had almost vanished into a nightmare, his portrait now hung in the airport's Heroes of Colorado exhibit. Ma'am, are you Yolanda Sullivan? I turned to find a young TSA officer, probably no older than 25, looking at me with recognition and something like awe. I confirmed. My grandmother, she was almost sent to one of those facilities in Mexico. My family was desperate, didn't know what else to do. Then we saw your grandfather's story on the news. It saved her life. She's still with us getting proper care. Thank you. These encounters happened regularly now, at grocery stores, hospitals, community events. Strangers approaching to share how Grandpa's story had changed their family's trajectories. Each one added another layer to his legacy, proof that one person's stand against injustice could ripple outward infinitely. I was at the airport to pick up a special arrival. Maria Gonzalez's granddaughter, Elena, had graduated from law school and was returning to Denver to work at the Frank Sullivan Center as their lead legal advocate. Another life transformed by the intersection of tragedy and triumph that had begun at this airport. As I waited at baggage claim, I reflected on all that had changed. The Frank Sullivan Center had expanded to 5 locations across Colorado, with sister centers opening in other states. The Frank Sullivan Act had been passed, federally signed into law by a president who'd shared his own family's struggles with elder care during the ceremony. Universities offered Frank Sullivan scholarships for students pursuing careers in elder advocacy. But perhaps the most meaningful change was the most personal. 3 months ago, I'd received a letter that had sat unopened on my kitchen counter for weeks before I found the courage to read it. Dear Yolanda, my name is James Chen. I'm a chaplain at the federal prison where your father is incarcerated. I'm writing at his request, though he doesn't know I'm sharing this context with you. Your father is dying. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctors give him perhaps 2 months. In my 20 years of prison ministry, I've seen many face their mortality. Most find either peace or bitterness. Your father has found something else, crushing recognition of what he threw away. He speaks of you often, of your grandfather, of the family he destroyed through greed. He's not seeking forgiveness. He's been clear about that. He knows some acts create unbridgeable chasms, but he asked me to tell you that he finally understands what you tried to show him, that his father was priceless and he traded infinity for nothing. He has refused pain medication beyond the basics, saying the discomfort helps him remember what his father must have felt. Confused, frightened, betrayed by those who should have protected him. It's not atonement, he says. Nothing could atone. It's just acknowledgement. If you choose not to respond or visit, he understands. He simply wanted you to know that the son who tried to throw his father away finally comprehends the magnitude of his crime, and that your courage in stopping him was the greatest gift you could have given, even if he was too lost in greed to see it then. Have you ever faced difficult decisions about caring for an elderly relative? What helped you find the right path? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what another family needs to hear. And if this story touched your heart, please subscribe, and share it with others who might need this reminder. Our elderly are precious, not disposable. Together, we can ensure no one's grandparent becomes a throwaway person.